A mafia boss points a gun at his rival's head in a glittering ballroom while the city holds its breath in Posupski Boats. And the only thing stopping him from pulling the trigger is the hand of a woman who walked into his world as a fake wife and became the one real thing he couldn't afford to lose. Emma Vale was a broke waitress, barely surviving on tips and cold coffee, until Dante Morelli offered her $1,000 to pretend to be his wife for one night. She thought it was easy money. She had no idea she'd just become the weakness of the most dangerous man in the city. Follow Emma's story to the end. Like this video and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey has traveled. Rain turned the city into something ugly and honest. It stripped away the polish, revealed the rust underneath, and reminded everyone that glamour was just another word for expensive lies. Emma Vale understood that better than most. She'd spent the last 3 years watching the shine wear off everything she touched. Her apartment, her clothes, her hope that tomorrow might be different from today. The kitchen at Venenzo's smelled like garlic, grease, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. Emma balanced 4 plates on her left arm, while her right hand gripped a water pitcher that weighed more than it should. Her feet throbbed inside shoes held together with duct tape she'd carefully covered with black marker. Nobody noticed the tape. Nobody noticed her, period. That was the best part of being a waitress. You could disappear in plain sight. Table 12 needs refills, Marco barked from behind the bar. He was 50, balding, and mean in the casual way men get when they've spent decades ordering women around. And 14 wants their check. Move. Emma moved. Not because Marco deserved obedience, but because fighting cost energy she couldn't afford to waste. She'd learned that lesson young, watching her mother work herself to death trying to prove something to people who'd never cared. Emma had promised herself she wouldn't make the same mistake. She'd promised herself a lot of things that turned out to be lies. Table 12 was easy. Businessmen who tipped poorly and didn't make eye contact. Table 14 was a couple celebrating something. Anniversary, maybe. Or the kind of milestone that people with stable lives marked with expensive wine. Emma delivered the check with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, collected the cash, and turned toward the kitchen. That's when he walked in. Venenzo's had a rhythm. You worked there long enough, you learned to read it. The ebb and flow of conversation, the clink of silverware, the background hum of people pretending their lives were exactly what they wanted. When Dante Morelli stepped through the front door, the rhythm stopped. Just for a second, just long enough for every person in the room to register that something dangerous had arrived. Emma felt it before she saw him. A shift in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm. She turned. He was younger than she expected. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, with dark hair cut sharp and expensive. His suit probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months. But it wasn't the suit that made people nervous. It wasn't even the 2 men who followed him inside, moving like shadows with violent intent barely contained. It was the way he looked at the room, calm, controlled, and utterly certain that everything in it belonged to him if he decided to take it. Marco appeared from nowhere, his earlier meanness transformed into something close to panic, dressed up as hospitality. "Mr. Morelli, we weren't expecting you tonight. Your usual table is—" "Fine." Dante's voice was quiet. He didn't need volume. People leaned in to hear him, and that was power too. Emma watched Marco practically sprint toward the corner booth, the best table in the restaurant, the one they kept reserved even when the place was packed. She'd never understood why until now. Dante Morelli walked through Venenzo's like he owned it because he probably did. Half the restaurants in the city paid protection money to someone. The other half paid it to someone else. Either way, rent always came due. She should have stayed in the kitchen, should have let one of the other servers handle the table. But Rosa was on break, and Jennifer had quit yesterday without warning, and Emma was already moving before her brain caught up with her feet. The booth was tucked into the back corner, private enough for conversation, but visible enough that everyone in the restaurant could see who sat there. Dante slid into the seat with the casual grace of someone who'd never questioned whether he belonged anywhere. His men took positions nearby, not sitting, just standing, watching. Emma approached with the water pitcher and 3 glasses. Her hands were steady. She'd trained them to be. You couldn't work Venenzo's with shaky hands, not when half the customers thought waitresses existed solely to tolerate their casual cruelty. "Good evening." She set the first glass down carefully. Can I start you with... Her elbow caught the pitcher's handle wrong. It was a small mistake, the kind you make when you've been on your feet for 8 hours and your body stops listening to your brain. The kind that shouldn't matter. Water hit the table in a cold rush, not a splash, a flood. It soaked the white tablecloth, spread toward the edge, and dripped onto Dante Morelli's $1,000 suit. The restaurant went silent. Emma's heart stopped, then started again too fast, hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She grabbed napkins with hands that were shaking now, propriety be damned. I'm so sorry, let me... Stop. One word, quiet, absolute. She stopped. Dante looked at the water spreading across his lap, then at Emma. His eyes were dark, unreadable. She'd heard stories about men like him. Everyone had. The kind of stories that ended with people disappearing, or worse, not disappearing, just turning up broken in ways that made sure everyone else remembered to be afraid. What's your name? He asked. Emma. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Emma Vale. Emma Vale. He repeated it like he was testing how it sounded, like he was deciding something. How long have you worked here? 3 years? You like it? The question caught her off guard. She should have said yes, should have apologized again, offered to pay for dry cleaning she couldn't afford, done whatever it took to make this moment end. Instead, she told the truth. No. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something that suggested he understood more than she'd intended to reveal. Sit down. What? Sit down. He gestured to the opposite side of the booth. Not a request, a command dressed up as a suggestion. Emma glanced toward the kitchen. Marco was watching, his face red, probably calculating how much this disaster was going to cost. She could see the firing happening in real time, could already feel the panic of losing the only income keeping her alive. She sat. Dante studied her. Not the way men usually looked at her, that casual assessment women learn to ignore or endure. This was different. He was reading her the way you'd read a map, tracing routes, measuring distances, deciding if she could get him where he needed to go. You're broke, he said. Not a question. Emma's jaw tightened. That's not really your student loans, medical bills, bad luck? All three. She didn't know why she was answering. Maybe because the night was already ruined. Maybe because there was something almost refreshing about someone saying the quiet part out loud. Dante leaned back. The water had stopped spreading. One of his men had quietly replaced the tablecloth while they talked, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from practice. How much do you owe? Excuse me? How much debt are you carrying? Emma laughed. It came out sharp, almost mean. Why? You planning to pay it off? No. He folded his hands on the table. But I have a proposition. I'm not interested in... Not that kind of proposition. His voice stayed level. I need a wife for one night. You need money. We can help each other. The absurdity of it hit her like cold water all over again. You want to hire me to pretend to be your wife? Yes. For one night. Yes. Why? Dante's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something that looked almost like vulnerability before it disappeared. Because the people I'm meeting expect me to have one. And because showing up without her raises questions I don't want to answer. Her? Emma's stomach turned. You have had. The word came out flat, final. She's gone. The business arrangement remains. You fit the general description. You're presentable. You can keep your mouth shut when it matters. How do you know I can keep my mouth shut? Because you've been standing in this restaurant for 3 years watching people treat you like furniture and you haven't burned the place down yet. He paused. That takes discipline. Emma should have walked away. Should have told him to find someone else. Someone who didn't mind playing dress-up for a criminal. Someone who had fewer moral lines left to cross. But the rent was due in 4 days, and she was $300 short, and the landlord had already warned her that next time there wouldn't be another extension. How much? She asked. $1,000 cash, tonight. $1,000. Enough to cover rent and groceries and maybe even fix the check engine light that had been glowing on her dashboard for 6 weeks. enough to breathe for 1 month without the constant weight of numbers crushing her chest. What would I have to do? The question came out steadier than she felt. Show up, smile. Let me introduce you as my wife. Answer basic questions if anyone asks. Don't contradict me. Don't draw attention. Don't make me regret hiring you. He tilted his head slightly. Think you can handle that? Emma looked at him, really looked. Beneath the expensive suit and the controlled menace, she saw something familiar. Someone who'd learned to survive by pretending to be whatever the moment required. Someone who understood that desperation wasn't weakness, it was just math that hadn't worked out yet. When? She asked. Tomorrow night. I'll pick you up at 7. Where? Where do you live? She almost didn't answer. Giving her address to a man like Dante Morelli seemed like the kind of mistake that ended badly. But he already knew where she worked, already knew her name, already knew she was desperate enough to consider this insane offer. What difference did one more piece of information make? She gave him the address. He didn't write it down, just nodded once, like he'd committed it to memory. One more thing, he said. You tell anyone about this, your friends, your family, anyone. The deal is off. This stays between us. I don't have friends. Emma stood up. Her legs felt unsteady. And my family is dead. She walked away before he could respond, before she could change her mind, before the reality of what she'd just agreed to could catch up with the desperate hope that maybe this was the break she needed. Marco grabbed her arm the second she hit the kitchen. What the hell were you thinking? He said it was fine. He said, Marco sputtered, you dumped water on Dante Morelli and you think... He tipped. Emma pulled her arm free and grabbed the check Dante's man had left on the table. $500. For water and a conversation. Relax. She changed out of her uniform in the bathroom, hands shaking as she pulled on jeans and the sweater with the hole in the left sleeve. $500. Just for spilling water. What the hell was she walking into? The rain hadn't stopped. Emma stood under the restaurant's awning and watched it turn the streetlights into blurred halos. Her shift was over. She should go home, sleep, think this through with a clear head. Instead, she thought about the number in her bank account, thought about the landlord's face when she told him she needed more time, thought about the way Dante Morelli had looked at her like she was a person instead of a problem. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Tomorrow. 7 p.m. Wear something nice. I'll take care of the rest. Emma stared at the message. She should block the number, should forget this whole thing happened, should find another way. But there wasn't another way. She'd spent 3 years looking for one. She texted back. Okay. The response came immediately. Good. The next day crawled past like something wounded. Emma called in sick to work, the first time in 3 years, and spent the morning staring at her closet like it might contain an outfit appropriate for pretending to be a mobster's wife. It didn't. Everything she owned was either work clothes or the kind of casual pieces you bought when comfort mattered more than style. She took the bus downtown to a consignment shop she'd walked past 100 times but never entered. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside. The woman behind the counter looked up, assessed Emma in one sweep, and went back to her magazine. Emma moved through the racks slowly. Everything was out of her price range, even second-hand. She was about to leave when she found it. A black dress, simple and elegant, with a price tag that would eat most of the $500 Dante had tipped her. She held it up. The fabric was soft, real, the kind of thing someone wore to events where the wine list had more pages than the food menu. That's a good choice. The woman had appeared beside her, silent as smoke. Valentino, 2 seasons old, but it's a classic cut. How much? Tag says $350. Emma's chest tightened. Too much. Way too much for something she'd wear once and never touch again. I can do $300, the woman added. Cash. Emma bought the dress. She spent the rest of the day in a haze of preparation that felt like studying for a test she couldn't pass. She showered twice, shaved her legs for the first time in weeks, painted her nails with polish she'd stolen from a drugstore in a moment of weakness she still felt guilty about. She straightened her hair with an iron that kept shorting out, burning her fingers twice before she gave up and let it dry naturally. At 6:30, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized herself. The dress fit perfectly. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders. The makeup she'd applied with a shaking hand made her look older, more composed, almost like someone who belonged at the kind of event where powerful men gathered. Almost. The knock came at exactly 7. Emma grabbed her purse, the one nice bag she owned, bought years ago when she still believed in investing in quality, and opened the door. Dante Morelli stood in the hallway of her shitty apartment building wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than her car. Behind him, one of his men waited by the stairs, alert and motionless. "You look good," Dante said. "Thanks." Emma stepped into the hall and locked her door. The lock stuck, like it always did. She had to jiggle the key twice before the bolt caught. When she turned around, Dante was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Ready?" he asked. "No. Not even close." "Yes." The car was waiting outside. Not a car, actually. A black SUV with windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. The door opened as they approached. Emma slid into leather seats that smelled new and expensive. Dante followed, settling beside her with the casual ease of someone who spent half his life in vehicles like this. The door closed. The sound was solid, final, like a vault ceiling. "Where are we going?" Emma asked. "The Costello Hotel. Private event." "Very private." Dante adjusted his cufflinks. "The people there tonight are important, powerful. They don't ask questions they already know the answers to, and they don't forgive mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" He looked at her. "The kind where you forget your story, or contradict mine, or draw attention to yourself in a way that makes them wonder why you're really there." Emma's mouth went dry. "And what is my story? We met 2 years ago. You were working at Venenzo's. I asked you to dinner. 6 months later, I asked you to marry me. You said yes because you love me, not because of what I do or who I am." He paused. "Can you sell that?" "Can you?" Emma shot back. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "Fair question." "What's my ring size?" 6. "Favorite color?" "Blue." "How do I take my coffee?" "Black. 2 sugars." Emma stared at him. "You actually researched me. I don't walk into situations unprepared." Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "Hold out your hand." She did. He opened the box and removed a ring that caught the dim light and threw it back in sharp, brilliant pieces. Diamond, large, set in platinum that felt cold against her skin as he slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Don't lose it," he said. "It's worth more than your apartment." Comforting. Emma looked at the ring, then at Dante. "What happens if someone realizes I'm not actually your wife?" "They won't." "But if they do, they won't." His voice hardened. "Because you're going to play your part, and I'm going to play mine. And in 4 hours, this will be over and you'll have your money. Understand?" Emma understood. She understood she'd stepped into something bigger than a simple transaction. She understood the weight of the ring on her finger wasn't just metal and stone. It was a promise of consequences if she failed. She understood she should be terrified. She was. The SUV pulled up to the Costello Hotel entrance. Lights blazed. People moved in the kind of coordinated chaos that came with high-profile events. Valets in white jackets, security in dark suits, cameras that weren't pointed at anyone in particular but somehow saw everything. Dante's hand found hers. His grip was firm, steady. "Stay close. Smile. Let me do most of the talking." The door opened. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and fresh flowers. Dante stepped out first, then turned to offer Emma his hand. She took it. The moment her feet touched the red carpet, everything changed. Cameras turned, people noticed. And Emma realized with perfect, terrible clarity that she'd just become visible in a way she'd spent her entire life avoiding. Dante's arm slid around her waist, possessive, protective. "You're doing fine," he murmured against her ear. "Just breathe." They moved through the entrance into a lobby that looked like something out of a dream. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, crystal chandeliers dripping light, music floating down from somewhere above. Live piano, playing something classical Emma didn't recognize. A man approached. Late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that screamed old money and older power. His smile was warm. His eyes were not. Dante? They shook hands. Good to see you. Marcus. Dante's posture shifted subtly, still relaxed but ready. You remember my wife, Emma. Marcus turned to her, and Emma felt herself being measured in the space between heartbeats. Of course. How could I forget? He took her hand and kissed it with practiced charm. You're even more lovely than I remembered. Emma smiled, hoped it looked genuine. You're too kind. Not at all. Marcus kept her hand a moment too long before releasing it. Dante's a lucky man, though I suspect he already knows that. Every day, Dante said smoothly. His hand tightened on Emma's waist. Shall we? They moved deeper into the hotel, through hallways lined with art that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Other couples passed them. Women in gowns that sparkled, men in tuxedos cut so perfectly they looked sculpted rather than sewn. Everyone smiled. Everyone nodded. Everyone looked at Emma like they were trying to solve an equation that didn't quite add up. The ballroom doors opened onto a space that stole Emma's breath. Gold and cream and crystal. Tables arranged in perfect symmetry, a dance floor that gleamed, and people, so many people, moving through it all with the confidence of those who'd never questioned whether they belonged. Dante leaned close. The man at the table near the window is Antonio Castellano. He's going to try to talk to you. Be polite. Be boring. Don't engage. Why? Because his family and mine don't get along, and he'll use anything you say against me later. Dante's voice stayed low, casual, like they were discussing the weather. The woman in red is Senator Blackwood. She'll ask about your background. Keep it vague. The couple by the bar are the Thorntons. They're harmless. Probably. Emma's head spun. Too many names, too many rules, too many ways to fail. Hey! Dante turned her to face him. For a second, the controlled mask slipped, and she saw something almost human underneath. You can do this. Just follow my lead. Before Emma could respond, a woman in emerald silk swept toward them. She was beautiful in the way that required money and maintenance. Perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect everything. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Dante, darling. She kissed his cheek. I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it. Victoria. Dante returned the kiss without warmth. You know I never miss these events. Victoria's gaze slid to Emma. And this must be the famous wife. We've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope, Emma said. Of course. Victoria's smile didn't waver. Though I must admit, I'm curious. How exactly did you two meet? Dante's always been so private about his personal life. Emma felt Dante tense beside her. This was a test. She could feel it. At Venenzo's, Emma said, kept her voice steady. I was working. He came in for dinner. We got talking. She looked at Dante, let herself smile like the memory actually meant something. He asked me out. I said yes. The rest is history. How romantic. Victoria's tone suggested she found it anything but. And you just knew he was the one? I knew he was different. Emma held Victoria's gaze. Everything else I learned later. Something flickered in Victoria's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? Hard to tell. Well, Victoria raised her champagne glass in a mock toast. Here's to love and all its surprises. Enjoy the evening. She glided away, leaving Emma's heart hammering against her ribs. That was good, Dante said quietly. She was testing you. I figured. Emma grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter and downed half of it in one swallow. How many more tests do I have to pass? Depends on how many people decide you're worth their attention. Turns out, that number was high. For the next 2 hours, Emma smiled and nodded and answered the same questions in slightly different variations. Where are you from? What do you do? How did you meet? Do you have family? What are your plans? Each question felt like a trap, and maybe they were. These people didn't make small talk. They gathered intelligence disguised as conversation. Dante stayed close. His hand rarely left the small of her back. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple in love. Comfortable with each other, connected by something deeper than performance. Emma almost started to believe it herself. Almost. Then Antonio Castellano appeared. He was younger than Emma expected. Maybe 30, with the kind of dark good looks that came with knowing exactly how attractive you were. His tuxedo was slightly too tight, like he'd had it tailored to show off rather than to fit properly. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "Dante," Antonio's voice carried an edge. "Didn't think you'd show. Wouldn't miss it." Dante's tone stayed neutral, but his body shifted. Subtle, protective, putting himself slightly between Emma and Antonio. Antonio's gaze moved to Emma, lingered. And this must be the mysterious Mrs. Morelli. "Emma." She kept her voice cool, professional, exactly as boring as Dante had told her to be. "Antonio Castellano." He extended his hand. Emma shook it briefly, noted the way he held on a fraction too long. "I have to say, Dante's been keeping you very well hidden." "I prefer privacy," Emma said. "Understandable." Antonio's smile widened. Given the circumstances, the words hung in the air like a threat wrapped in politeness. Dante's hand tightened on Emma's back. "We should find our table." "Of course." Antonio stepped aside, but his eyes stayed on Emma. "Enjoy your evening, both of you." They moved away, Dante's grip firm enough that Emma could feel the controlled tension in his fingers. "What did he mean by that?" she asked. "The circumstances?" "Nothing." Dante's jaw was tight. He was fishing. For what? Anything he can use. Before Emma could push further, Dante stopped at a table near the center of the ballroom. 6 chairs. 4 of them occupied by people who looked at Emma with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. "Everyone," Dante said, "this is my wife, Emma." Emma sat down and prepared to spend the rest of the night pretending her entire world wasn't built on a foundation of lies that felt increasingly fragile with every passing second. Dinner was served. 7 courses of food Emma barely tasted. Conversation flowed around her. Business talk disguised as casual chat, alliances being tested, power being measured and redistributed in language that sounded polite but cut like glass. She watched Dante navigate it all with the precision of someone who'd learned this dance young and practiced it until every step became instinct. By the time dessert arrived, Emma's face hurt from smiling. Her feet ached in heels she wasn't used to wearing. The champagne had gone to her head, leaving everything slightly soft around the edges. Then the music shifted, slower, softer. Dante stood and offered his hand. Dance? It wasn't optional. Emma took his hand and let him lead her onto the floor where other couples swayed in practiced rhythm. His arm settled around her waist. Her hand found his shoulder. They moved together like they'd done this 1,000 times before. "You're doing well," Dante said quietly. "Better than I expected." "You sound surprised." "I am." His hand shifted slightly on her back. Most people can't handle this kind of pressure. Most people haven't spent years surviving on tips and holding their temper while drunk customers grab their ass. Emma met his eyes. "I know how to perform." Something in his expression shifted. "This isn't a performance." "Isn't it?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "I'm literally being paid to pretend to be your wife. I mean this." He pulled her slightly closer. "The way everyone's watching, the judgments they're making. The fact that one wrong word could cost both of us everything. That part's real." Emma's breath caught. She'd been so focused on playing her role that she'd forgotten the stakes extended beyond her $1,000 paycheck. "What happens if we fail?" "We don't fail." "But if we do, Emma." Her name on his tongue sounded different, serious. "We don't fail." The song ended, another began. They kept dancing. Somewhere during the 3rd song, Emma forgot she was supposed to be acting, forgot about the rent and the debt and the apartment with the lock that stuck, forgot everything except the way Dante held her, careful and certain, like she was something valuable he'd decided to protect. When he finally let her off the floor, her heart was beating too fast for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. They returned to the table, more champagne, more conversation. The night blurred into a haze of faces and names and moments that Emma knew she'd remember later in pieces. Then Antonio appeared again. He was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but the kind where control started slipping and truth pushed through the cracks. He pulled out the empty chair beside Emma and sat without invitation. "Having fun?" he asked. "Yes," Emma said carefully. "It's a lovely event." Is it? Antonio leaned closer. His breath smelled like whiskey and something bitter. Or are you just counting down the minutes until you can leave? Dante's hand found Emma's under the table. His grip was a warning. I'm enjoying myself, Emma said, kept her voice level. Sure you are. Antonio's smile turned mean. Must be quite the adjustment, going from serving tables to sitting at them. The table went quiet. Everyone listening now, even if they pretended not to. Emma felt Dante start to rise, felt the violence coiled in him, ready to spring. She put her hand on his arm, held him there. You're right, she said to Antonio, calm, controlled. It is an adjustment. I spent 3 years learning that how people treat waitresses says a lot more about them than it does about the person holding the tray. She tilted her head. What does it say about you? Antonio's face darkened. He opened his mouth to respond. We're leaving, Dante said. Not loud, just final. He stood, helped Emma to her feet, and guided her away from the table without looking back. They moved through the ballroom in silence, out into the hallway, down toward the exit. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. She'd crossed a line, broken the rule about not drawing attention, failed the test. But Dante didn't look angry. He looked something else, something Emma couldn't quite identify. The SUV was waiting. They climbed inside, the door closed, and finally, blessedly, they were alone. I'm sorry, Emma started. I shouldn't have. You were perfect. Dante turned to face her. He was testing you, trying to get under your skin, make you react. You handled it exactly right. I embarrassed him. You put him in his place. Dante's voice held something that might have been pride. There's a difference. Emma looked at the ring on her finger. The weight of it felt different now, heavier, more complicated. What happens next? I take you home, pay you your money, and we pretend this never happened. That was the deal. That was what she'd agreed to. So why did it suddenly feel like the wrong ending? The ride back to her apartment passed in silence. Dante didn't explain what the event had really been about. Didn't tell her what she'd just helped him survive. Emma didn't ask. Some questions were better left unspoken. The SUV stopped outside her building. Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. 1,000, as promised. Emma took it, felt the weight of cash that would solve this month's problems and create next month's questions. Thank you. She started to remove the ring. Dante's hand covered hers. Keep it, he said. What? Keep the ring. Consider it a bonus. Emma stared at him. This is worth more than your apartment. I know. His hand stayed on hers. Keep it anyway. Why? Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost vulnerable. Because you're the first person in 2 years who's looked at me like I'm human instead of useful. Emma's throat tightened. She should have gotten out of the car, should have taken her money and walked away from whatever this was becoming. Instead, she asked, what happened 2 years ago? Dante's expression shuddered. The vulnerability disappeared behind the controlled mask he wore so well. Good night, Emma. It was a dismissal, clear, final. Emma climbed out of the SUV and watched it pull away, carrying Dante back into whatever dark world he lived in when he wasn't pretending to be someone's husband. She made it to her apartment before the shaking started. Adrenaline crash mixed with champagne and the surreal awareness that she'd just survived something she still didn't fully understand. The envelope sat on her kitchen counter. The ring glittered on her finger. Both of them proof that the night had been real, not some elaborate dream. Emma pulled out her phone. She should delete Dante's number, should forget this ever happened. The text arrived before she could decide. I may need you again, same terms. Interested? Emma stared at the message. Every rational part of her brain screamed no. This was dangerous, complicated. The kind of situation that ended badly for people like her. But the rent was only paid for 1 month. The debt hadn't disappeared. And somewhere beneath the fear, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Alive. She typed back. Maybe. Depends on when. The response came immediately. Soon. Emma set the phone down and looked at the ring. At the money. At the choice she'd just made. She had no idea what she'd gotten herself into. She was about to find out. The call came 3 days later. Emma was elbow-deep in dishwater when her phone buzzed against the counter, screen lighting up with the number she'd saved under a single initial, D. She dried her hands on a towel that had seen better days and answered. "Hello? I need you tonight." Dante's voice carried the same controlled authority she remembered. No greeting, no preamble, just expectation wrapped in certainty. Emma glanced at the clock. 4 in the afternoon. "I have a shift at 6. Call in sick." "I already did that once this week. Marco's going to—" "I'll double the rate, 2,000. A pause. Cash. Emma's protest died in her throat. $2,000. That was 2 months of breathing room, 2 months of not checking her bank account with her stomach in knots, 2 months of pretending her life wasn't held together with duct tape and desperate hope. "What time?" she asked. 7, same as before. Wear the black dress." The line went dead. Emma stood in her kitchen and stared at the phone like it might offer an explanation for why she kept saying yes to a man who treated her like a chess piece. He could move around the board whenever the game required it. The rational part of her brain knew this was a mistake. The desperate part didn't care. She called Marco, told him she had food poisoning. His response was a string of Italian curses followed by a threat that next time she'd be looking for a new job. Emma hung up and tried not to think about how many bridges she was burning for a man she barely knew. The black dress still hung in her closet, dry cleaned and wrapped in plastic like evidence of a crime she hadn't quite committed yet. Emma pulled it out and laid it on the bed. The ring sat in a jewelry box on her dresser. She'd tried to return it, left it sitting by the door for 2 days, but every time she looked at it, she remembered the way Dante had told her to keep it. Like he was giving her something that mattered. She showered, did her makeup, straightened her hair until it fell smooth and dark past her shoulders. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who didn't quite match the person she'd been a week ago. Same face, different armor. The knock came at 7 exactly. This time, Dante stood in the hallway alone. No security, no backup. Just him in another expensive suit that made her apartment look even shabbier by comparison. "Ready?" he asked. Emma grabbed her purse and followed him down the stairs. The same black SUV waited at the curb, engine running. They climbed inside and the door sealed them into leather-scented silence. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as the vehicle pulled into traffic. "My place." Dante adjusted his cufflinks without looking at her. "There's a dinner. Smaller group than last time, more intimate." Something in the way he said intimate made Emma's stomach tighten. "How intimate?" 6 people total, including us." He finally met her eyes. "These aren't strangers testing you for sport. These are people who know me well enough to spot a lie from across the room. You're going to have to sell this harder than you did at the Castello." "Sell what exactly?" "That we're married, that we're in love, that when I touch you, it's because I want to, not because I'm paying you to tolerate it." His gaze held hers. "Can you do that?" Emma's pulse kicked up. The first event had been theater, playing a role for an audience that didn't care enough to look too close. This was different. This was lying to people who'd notice every false note. "I can do it," she said. Hoped it was true. Dante's building was in the part of the city where rent stopped being measured in hundreds and started being calculated in ways that made normal people's eyes water. The lobby was all marble and chrome, staffed by doormen who nodded at Dante like he was royalty. The elevator required a key card to access the top floor. They rode up in silence. Emma watched the numbers climb and wondered what kind of man lived at the top of the world and still needed to hire someone to pretend to love him. The doors opened directly into Dante's penthouse. Emma stepped out and forgot how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, turning the skyline into a glittering backdrop that made everything else feel small by comparison. The space was massive, open-concept living area flowing into a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, hallways disappearing into rooms Emma could only guess at. Everything was clean lines and expensive materials, the kind of design that cost more than most people made in a year. "This is where you live?" The question came out before Emma could stop it. "Yes." Dante moved past her toward the bar. "You sound surprised." "I am." Emma walked to the windows and pressed her palm against the glass. The city sprawled beneath them, bright and chaotic and utterly removed from whatever world existed up here. "This doesn't feel real." "It's not." Dante poured 2 glasses of something amber and handed her one. It's just expensive. Emma took the glass but didn't drink. Why am I really here, Dante? He was quiet for a moment, studying her with that same calculating expression she'd seen at Venenzo's. Because the people coming tonight knew my wife, the real one. And if I show up without someone who can play the part convincingly, they're going to ask questions I don't want to answer. What happened to her? She died. The words came out flat, final. 2 years ago. Emma had suspected as much, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that changed the weight of what she'd agreed to do. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't know her. Dante downed his drink in one swallow. And if you had, you wouldn't be sorry. Before Emma could ask what that meant, the elevator chimed. Dante's entire demeanor shifted. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the controlled mask Emma was starting to recognize as his default setting. He moved to her side, slid his arm around her waist, and pulled her close with a possessiveness that felt disturbingly natural. Smile, he murmured against her ear. And remember, you love me. The elevator doors opened. The first couple through looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog for people who summered in places Emma couldn't pronounce. The man was tall, silver-haired, wearing casual wealth like a second skin. The woman beside him was younger by at least a decade, blonde and beautiful in the way that required professional maintenance. Dante. The man's voice carried genuine warmth. Good to see you. Richard. They shook hands. You remember Emma. Richard's gaze shifted to her, and Emma felt herself being assessed with the kind of attention that noticed everything. Of course. How could I forget? He took her hand and kissed it with practiced charm. You're looking lovely. Thank you. Emma smiled. Let herself lean into Dante slightly, the way a woman might if the man beside her was someone she actually chose to be near. The woman, Richard introduced her as Sophia, studied Emma with eyes that missed nothing. I love your dress. Valentino? Yes. Emma's mind raced. Should she elaborate, play it casual, pretend she owned a closet full of designer clothes instead of one dress bought secondhand? Good eye, Sophia said. That cut is classic, timeless. The elevator chimed again. 2 more people emerged, a couple in their 40s who introduced themselves as David and Catherine. They moved through greetings with the ease of people who'd known each other long enough that conversation required minimal effort. Dante guided Emma toward the dining area. The table was already set, crystal glasses catching light, silverware arranged with geometric precision, flowers in the center that probably cost more than Emma's weekly groceries. Everything perfect, everything controlled. They sat. Dante at the head of the table, Emma to his right. Close enough that when he reached for his wine, his arm brushed hers. Close enough that anyone watching would see a couple comfortable in each other's space. Dinner was served by staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The food was incredible. Each course a small work of art that Emma barely tasted. Conversation flowed around her. Business talk disguised as catching up between friends. She listened more than she spoke, watching the way Dante navigated questions about territories and shipments and payments, all of it coded in language that sounded legitimate but meant something darker underneath. So, Emma, Catherine said during the third course, pulling Emma's attention back to the table. Dante tells us you're still working at Venenzo's. It was a trap. Emma could feel it. These people knew Dante had money, knew his wife shouldn't need to work. The question was designed to reveal whether Emma was here for love or something else. I am. Emma kept her voice steady. I like staying busy. Even with everything Dante could offer you? Sophia's tone was light, curious, not quite accusatory. Seems like you could find other ways to occupy your time. I could. Emma looked at Dante, let herself smile like the answer actually mattered. But I'm not ready to give up the one thing that's still just mine. Something shifted in Dante's expression. The mask cracked just enough for Emma to see surprise underneath. I can respect that, Richard said, raising his glass. Independence is underrated. They toasted. Emma drank and tried to ignore the way Dante's hand had found her knee under the table, his thumb tracing small circles against her skin through the fabric of her dress. It was for show. Had to be. But it felt real enough to make her breath catch. The conversation moved on. Emma survived it by staying quiet, letting Dante lead, only speaking when directly addressed. She was getting better at this, reading the room, understanding which questions were tests and which were just politeness disguised as interest. Then David leaned forward, wine loosened and curious. "How's your mother doing, Dante? I heard she'd been having health issues." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dante's hand stilled on Emma's knee. His jaw tightened. "She's managing." "That's good to hear. I know how close you two are." David smiled, oblivious to the tension radiating off Dante in waves. "Must be nice having Emma around to help. Family's important, especially when my mother is fine." Dante's voice could have cut glass. "And I'd prefer not to discuss her health over dinner." Silence, awkward and heavy. Emma did the only thing she could think of. She covered Dante's hand with hers and squeezed gently. Not a performance, just instinct. The kind of thing you did when someone you cared about was hurting and you didn't have words to fix it. Dante looked at her. For a second, the mask was gone completely, and Emma saw straight through to something raw and barely contained. "Dessert?" she suggested. Bright, casual, giving everyone an excuse to move past the moment. Richard laughed, breaking the tension. "I like her, Dante. She's got sense." The rest of the dinner passed without incident. Dessert arrived. Something chocolate and elaborate that Emma forced herself to finish despite her stomach being in knots. Coffee followed. Then drinks in the living room, conversations breaking into smaller groups. Sophia cornered Emma near the windows while the men talked business. "You're good," Sophia said quietly. "Better than I expected." Emma's pulse spiked. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Sophia sipped her drink, gaze sharp. "You're playing a role. Question is whether you're playing it for him or for yourself." "I'm not playing anything." The lie tasted bitter. "Sure you're not." Sophia's smile held no warmth. "Word of advice? Dante's dangerous, not in the obvious ways, in the ways that make you think you can save him." She paused. "You can't." "I'm not trying to save anyone," Emma said. "Good." Sophia turned to leave, then stopped. His last wife thought she could change him, make him legitimate, turn him into something he's not. Her voice dropped. She died thinking she'd succeeded. Emma's blood went cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying be careful what you pretend to be. Sometimes the performance becomes the prison." Sophia walked away, leaving Emma standing at the window with her reflection staring back at her like an accusation. The guests left around midnight. Dante walked them to the elevator, played the gracious host, thanked them for coming. The moment the doors closed, his entire body sagged like he'd been holding himself upright through sheer will. "You did well," he said without turning around. Emma stood in the middle of the vast living room and felt suddenly, overwhelmingly tired. "What did Sophia mean about your last wife?" "Nothing." Dante moved to the bar and poured another drink. "She likes to stir up trouble." "She said your wife died trying to change you." "She did." Dante downed the whiskey in one pull. "But that's not why she died." "Then why?" "You ask a lot of questions for someone who's being paid not to." The words hit like a slap. Emma felt her spine straighten, anger replacing exhaustion. "You hired me to play your wife. Your friends just spent 3 hours interrogating me about our marriage, our relationship, our life together. I can't sell something I don't understand." Dante turned to face her. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "You want to understand? Fine. My wife was a liability. She knew too much, talked too much, trusted the wrong people. And one night someone decided she was worth more dead than alive." He paused. "That's what happens when you get close to me, Emma. People start seeing you as leverage instead of a person." Emma's chest tightened. "Is that what I am? Leverage?" "No." The answer came fast. Too fast. "You're a temporary solution to a permanent problem." "What problem?" "The problem of everyone thinking they can use my personal life as a weapon." Dante set the glass down hard enough that the sound echoed. "The problem of Antonio Castellano believing that if he finds the right pressure point, he can break me. The problem of looking weak in a world where weakness gets you killed. So you hired me to look strong." "I hired you to look human." Dante's voice softened. "There's a difference." Emma didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to reconcile the man in front of her, exhausted and raw and almost vulnerable, with the controlled menace everyone else seemed to fear. I should go, she said finally. Say. The word came out before Dante seemed to realize he was going to say it. I mean, it's late. The car service is off for the night. You can take the guest room. I'll have someone drive you home in the morning. It was a reasonable offer, practical even, but something in the way he said it made Emma think he didn't want to be alone more than he didn't want her traveling at midnight. Okay, she heard herself say. Dante showed her to a bedroom that was bigger than her entire apartment. Ensuite bathroom, walk-in closet, bed that looked like a cloud had been domesticated and forced into mattress form. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Thank you, he said, for tonight, for all of it. You're paying me to... I know what I'm paying you for. He straightened. But you didn't have to touch my hand at dinner, didn't have to redirect the conversation when David was being an idiot, didn't have to do any of the things that made tonight bearable instead of just survivable. A pause. So thank you. He left before Emma could respond. The door closed with a soft click, leaving her alone in a room that cost more than she'd make in a decade. Emma sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from Marco. 2 texts from the landlord asking about next month's rent. 1 from a number she didn't recognize offering to help with her student loan debt for a low fee of her firstborn child in eternal servitude to capitalism. She opened her banking app. The deposit from last week was still there. $1,000 that felt simultaneously like a fortune and not nearly enough. Tomorrow, Dante would pay her another $2,000. $3,000 total for 2 nights of playing pretend. $3,000 that was changing her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Emma stripped off the dress and stood in the bathroom that was bigger than her kitchen. Marble counters. Walk-in shower with enough nozzles to suggest someone had confused bathing with performance art. She turned on the water and stepped under the spray. When she finally crawled into bed, exhaustion pulled her under fast. She dreamed of Dante's hand on her knee, his thumb tracing circles that burned like brands. Dreamed of Sophia's warning. Dreamed of being someone who belonged in rooms like this, instead of someone who was just visiting from a world made of debt and desperation. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover, and the smell of coffee strong enough to pull her from unconsciousness. Emma pulled on the dress from last night, her only option, and followed the scent to the kitchen. Dante stood at the counter in jeans and a t-shirt that made him look younger, more human, less like the controlled menace he performed for everyone else. He was making breakfast, actually making it, not having staff do it for him. Morning, he said without looking up. Coffee? Please? Emma slid onto a bar stool and watched him work. You cook? When I want to. He poured her a cup and slid it across the counter. Eggs okay? Eggs are perfect. They ate in comfortable silence. It felt strangely domestic, like they were a real couple having a real morning instead of a complicated transaction wrapped in expensive sheets and temporary trust. I need you again, Dante said eventually. Next week. Different event. Same deal. Emma should have said no. Should have taken her money and walked away before this arrangement became something neither of them could control. But the rent was due again in 3 weeks, and the debt hadn't magically disappeared. And somewhere beneath the practicality, she wanted to see him again in a way that had nothing to do with money. How often is this going to happen? She asked. I don't know. Dante met her eyes. As long as it needs to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Emma sipped her coffee and weighed her options. The smart choice was obvious. The desperate choice was equally clear. The problem was figuring out which one she was about to make. Same rate? She asked. Same rate. Then okay. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Relief, maybe, or concern. Hard to tell. I'll have Marco send you the details. Marco? My assistant. He handles logistics. You have an assistant named Marco. Emma laughed despite herself. And I work for a boss named Marco. That's not confusing at all. Is your Marco an asshole? Constantly. Mine too. The corner of Dante's mouth lifted. Almost a smile. Must be something about the name. The car arrived an hour later. Dante walked Emma down, his hand on the small of her back like it belonged there. When they reached the SUV, he opened the door himself and pressed an envelope into her palm. 2,000, he said quietly. As promised. Emma took it. felt the weight of cash that would solve problems and create new ones. "Thank you, Emma." He caught her hand before she could climb into the vehicle. His grip was warm, certain. "Be careful going forward. People are starting to notice you. That's going to complicate things." "What kind of things?" "The kind I can't protect you from if you're not careful." He released her hand. "Just watch your back." The ride home passed in a blur. Emma counted the money twice, stored it in her purse, and tried not to think about the warning in Dante's voice. When the SUV pulled up to her building, she half expected to find Antonio Castellano waiting in the hallway with a knife and a smile. Instead, she found her landlord. "Miss Vale." He was 60, gray, and mean in the way that came from decades of dealing with tenants who couldn't pay on time. "We need to talk about next month." "I'll have it." Emma brushed past him toward the stairs. "First of the month, like always." "That's what you said last month." "And I paid you, didn't I?" 3 days late. He followed her up. "I'm running a business, not a charity." Emma reached her door and turned to face him. "You'll get your money. You always do." "Make sure I do." He descended the stairs, leaving Emma alone in the hallway with $3,000 cash and the sinking realization that it still wasn't enough. The next week passed in a haze of work and waiting. Emma picked up extra shifts at Venenzo's, trying to bank goodwill with Marco before she had to call in sick again. She avoided the other servers' questions about where she'd been, what she'd been doing, why she looked tired in a way that went deeper than long shifts and bad tips. Dante's assistant Marco, different Marco, helpful Marco, called 3 days later with details for the next event: charity gala, art auction, formal attire required. Emma would need a new dress. "Mr. Morelli has arranged for a stylist to meet you at Saks tomorrow at 2, Marco said, in a voice that suggested he'd made this kind of arrangement before. "Everything will be taken care of." "I can find my own dress," Emma protested. "Mr. Morelli insists." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some illusion of independence, but the truth was she couldn't afford another $300 consignment purchase, and pride was a luxury she'd given up around the same time her savings account hit zero. "Fine," she said. 2:00. The stylist was a woman named Claire, who looked at Emma like she was a project with potential. They spent 2 hours trying on dresses that cost more than Emma's car, shoes that could have paid her electric bill for 6 months, jewelry that made her hands shake every time she touched it. "This one," Claire said finally, holding up a deep red gown that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. "It's perfect for your coloring, sophisticated, elegant, and it sends the right message." "What message is that?" Emma asked. Claire smiled. "That you belong." The dress cost $6,000. Emma knew because she saw the price tag before Claire carefully removed it. $6,000 for fabric that would touch her skin for one night and then disappear back into whatever world clothes like this lived in when they weren't being worn. "Mr. Morelli has already taken care of payment," Claire said when Emma hesitated, "along with shoes, accessories, and alterations." Emma left Saks feeling like she'd just committed a crime she couldn't name. The dress hung in a garment bag over her arm, protected like something precious instead of something temporary. When she got home, she hung it in her closet next to the black Valentino and tried not to think about the fact that her wardrobe now contained $8,000 worth of clothes and $0 worth of choices about how her life was unfolding. The gala was Friday night. Dante picked her up at 6:30. This time when Emma opened the door, she was ready, hair styled, makeup perfect. The red dress fitting like it had been made for her, which it probably had been given the alterations Claire insisted on. She wore the ring Dante had given her. It felt wrong not to, like leaving the house without shoes. Dante stood in the hallway and stared at her with an expression that made Emma's breath catch. "You look..." He trailed off, started again. "You look incredible." "Claire did a good job," Emma said. "Claire did what I paid her to do." Dante stepped closer. Close enough that Emma could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that made her want to lean in. "You did the rest." They rode to the gala in silence that felt heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Dante's hand found hers in the dark interior of the SUV. His thumb traced the same circles on her palm that he'd traced on her knee at dinner, and Emma wondered when his touch had started feeling less like performance and more like inevitability. The venue was a gallery in the arts district, transformed into something glittering and exclusive for one night only. Chandeliers hung from exposed beams. Art covered every wall, pieces that probably cost more than Emma would make in her entire life. People moved through the space wearing wealth like armor. Conversations happening in the coded language Emma was starting to understand meant money and power, and the places where the two intersected. Dante guided her through introductions with his hand on her back. She smiled, answered questions, played the role of devoted wife with a precision that felt disturbingly natural. But something was different tonight. People looked at her longer, studied her harder, asked questions that felt less like politeness and more like investigation. How long have you been married? A woman in diamonds that could have funded a small country. 2 years. Emma's answer came smooth, practiced. And you still work at that restaurant? A man with the kind of face that suggested he'd never worked a day in his life. I like staying busy. The same answer she'd given at dinner, the one that sounded good enough to avoid follow-up questions. But tonight, the questions didn't stop. They came at her from all sides, subtle and probing, designed to find the cracks in her story. Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did Dante propose? What's your relationship like with his family? Do you want children? What are your plans for the future? Each question was a trap, each answer a potential landmine. Emma navigated them all with Dante beside her, his presence both shield and reminder that she was performing for an audience that would notice if she stumbled. Then Antonio Castellano appeared. He materialized out of the crowd like smoke given form, wearing a tuxedo that fit too well and a smile that promised violence wrapped in civility. Dante, Antonio's voice carried across the space between them. Didn't expect to see you here. Antonio. Dante's hand tightened on Emma's waist. Funny, I was thinking the same about you, Father insisted. Antonio's gaze slid to Emma and lingered in a way that made her skin crawl. And how could I refuse when I heard you'd be here with your lovely wife? The way he said wife made it sound like an accusation. Emma forced a smile. Antonio, good to see you again. Is it? He stepped closer, too close, invading the space that should have existed between strangers. I've been thinking about you since the Castello. Have you? Emma's voice stayed flat. Not a question. I have. Antonio reached for her hand. Emma let him take it because refusing would have caused a scene. His grip was too tight, his thumb pressing against her pulse point like he was measuring how fast her heart was beating. I'm curious about something. What's that? Dante's voice could have cut steel. How a waitress from nowhere ends up married to one of the most powerful men in the city. Antonio's smile widened. Seems like quite the fairy tale. Love doesn't check bank accounts, Emma said. Doesn't it? Antonio released her hand but didn't step back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone made a very calculated investment. Dante moved, fast. 1 second he was beside Emma, the next he had Antonio by the collar, pulling him close enough that their faces were inches apart. Choose your next words carefully, Dante said quietly, dangerously, because they might be the last ones you get to say. The gallery went silent, everyone watching, everyone waiting to see if this moment would tip into violence. Antonio laughed, actually laughed, the sound sharp and mean. Easy, Dante, I'm just making conversation. No, Dante's grip tightened. You're testing boundaries, seeing how far you can push before I push back. He leaned closer. You found the line. Don't cross it again. He released Antonio with enough force that the other man stumbled back a step. For one electric moment, Emma thought Antonio was going to retaliate, thought the gallery was about to become a crime scene. Then Antonio straightened his jacket and smiled like nothing had happened. Enjoy the rest of your evening, he said, looked at Emma. Both of you. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving tension thick enough to choke on. Dante turned to Emma. We're leaving. What? Now. He didn't wait for agreement, just took her hand and guided her through the gallery toward the exit, moving with purpose that suggested staying wasn't an option. Emma followed because she didn't know what else to do. They made it to the SUV before Dante's control finally shattered. Fuck! He slammed his palm against the roof of the vehicle hard enough that the sound echoed off the surrounding buildings. Fuck. Emma stood on the sidewalk and watched him unravel. This wasn't the composed businessman from dinner. Wasn't the calculated menace everyone feared. This was something raw and barely contained, violence looking for an outlet. Dante. He knows. Dante turned to face her. His eyes were wild. Antonio knows you're not really my wife. Emma's stomach dropped. How? I don't know, but he knows. Dante ran both hands through his hair. And if he knows, that means he's been digging. Means he's looking for ways to use you against me. I can handle, You can't. Dante's voice cracked. You have no idea what these people are capable of. What Antonio is capable of. He stepped closer. Close enough that Emma could see the fear beneath the anger. If he decides you're worth more to him as leverage than you are to me as a wife, you're going to disappear, and I won't be able to stop it. Emma's pulse hammered. Then what do we do? You stop coming to these events. Stop pretending to be someone you're not. Stop putting yourself in danger for money you shouldn't need to risk your life for. And what happens to you? I deal with it. Dante's jaw tightened. Like I always do. By yourself. Yes. That's not a plan, Emma heard herself say. That's just another way of losing. Dante stared at her. This isn't your fight, Isn't it? Emma's voice rose. You made it my fight the second you asked me to play your wife. The second you introduced me to these people. The second you put that ring on my finger and told me to keep it. She held up her hand, the diamond catching streetlight. You don't get to decide I'm in danger and then cut me loose like I'm disposable. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. The lie tasted bitter. I need to know what I'm actually dealing with. Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, defeated. Get in the car. They drove in silence to his penthouse. Emma's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. If Antonio knew she wasn't really Dante's wife, what else did he know? How deep had he dug? And what was he planning to do with the information? The elevator ride up felt like descending instead of ascending. When they reached Dante's floor, he didn't speak, just walked to the bar and poured 2 drinks with hands that weren't quite steady. He handed Emma a glass. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them pulled away. My wife's name was Victoria, Dante said finally. We were married for 3 years. She was difficult, ambitious. She wanted me to go legitimate, leave the family business, build something clean. He downed his drink. I told her it wasn't that simple. She told me I wasn't trying hard enough. Emma sipped her whiskey and waited. She started making moves without telling me, reaching out to people, making deals, promising things I hadn't agreed to. Dante's voice went flat. One of those people was Marco Castellano, Antonio's father. Emma's blood went cold. What kind of deals? The kind that would have destroyed me if they'd gone through. The kind that would have exposed weaknesses my enemies could exploit. He poured another drink. When I found out, I told her to stop. She refused. Said she was doing it for us, for our future. What happened? Someone killed her. Dante's hand tightened on the glass. Made it look like a robbery. But I know what it was. I know who ordered it. Marco Castellano. No. Dante met Emma's eyes. Me. The word hung in the air like smoke. Heavy. Poisonous. Emma set down her glass before she dropped it. You killed your own wife. I had her killed. The distinction seemed important to him. There's a difference. Is there? Emma's voice shook. She was going to get us both killed. I chose her over me. Dante's expression was empty, carved from stone. That's who I am, Emma. That's what you've gotten yourself involved with. A man who kills the people he's supposed to love when they become inconvenient. Emma should have run, should have grabbed her purse and walked out and never looked back. Instead, she asked, Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're risking. Dante moved closer. Because Antonio's going to use you the same way Victoria tried to use me. As leverage. As a weakness. And when that happens, you need to understand that I might not be able to choose you. I'm not asking you to choose me. Emma's pulse hammered. I'm asking you to be honest about what this is. This is a transaction. You play my wife. I pay you money. That's all it can be. Then why did you tell me about Victoria? Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because somewhere between the Castello and tonight, it stopped being just a transaction, and that terrifies me more than Antonio ever could. Emma's breath caught. She should have said something, should have told him this was exactly why she needed to walk away. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't romantic. It was desperate and raw and tasted like whiskey and terrible decisions. Dante froze for half a second, then his hands were in her hair, pulling her closer, kissing her back with an intensity that made Emma's knees weak. They broke apart, breathing hard. "This is a mistake," Dante said. "I know." Emma's hands were shaking. "You should leave." "I know." Neither of them moved. Dante's phone buzzed. Then again. He pulled it out and his expression went from conflicted to lethal in the space between heartbeats. "What?" Emma asked. "Antonio." Dante showed her the screen. A photo. Emma standing outside the gallery. The message beneath it read, "She photographs well. Would be a shame if something happened to that pretty face." Emma's blood turned to ice. "Get your things," Dante said. His voice had gone cold, controlled. The vulnerability from moments ago completely erased. "You're staying here." "What?" "You're not safe at your apartment. Not anymore." He was already moving, pulling out his phone, making calls. "Marco's going to have someone pack your essentials and bring them here. You don't leave this building without security. You don't go anywhere alone. And you definitely don't go back to Venenzo's. You can't just, Well, I can." Dante turned to face her. "And I am. Because if Antonio gets to you, he won't just kill you. He'll make it slow, make it painful. Make sure I watch every second of it." His jaw tightened. "I won't let that happen." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, but the photo on Dante's phone made it clear that Antonio had been watching, waiting, planning. She was already in too deep to swim back to shore. "How long?" she asked. "As long as it takes." "And what am I supposed to do? Just hide up here while I handle it?" Dante's voice left no room for argument. "That's not negotiable." Emma looked at the man in front of her, dangerous and desperate and utterly certain that keeping her alive was worth whatever it cost, and realized with perfect clarity that she'd stopped being just a hired actress, somewhere between the first dinner and tonight. She'd become the one thing Dante couldn't afford to lose. And that made her the most valuable target in the city. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll stay." Dante's shoulders dropped half an inch. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Thank you." He made more calls, arranged security, talked to people in the clipped language of someone giving orders he expected to be followed without question. Emma stood by the window and watched the city glitter beneath them, beautiful and deadly, and utterly indifferent to the fact that her life had just been put on hold indefinitely. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Enjoy your cage, little bird. We'll talk soon." Emma deleted it without responding. But she knew Antonio had seen her hesitation in that kiss, had seen the way she'd looked at Dante like he was something more than a paycheck, and now he was going to use it to destroy them both. Emma woke to the sound of voices she didn't recognize. Not shouting. Worse than that. The kind of controlled conversation that happened when professionals discussed problems that required violent solutions. She'd been in Dante's guest room for 3 days, 3 days of expensive prison where meals appeared at regular intervals and security personnel she never saw kept watch over a life that no longer belonged to her. She pulled on the robe Dante had provided. Silk, probably cost more than her monthly rent, and followed the voices to the living room. Dante stood near the windows with 3 men Emma had never met. They wore suits that tried to look normal but failed in the way that marked them as people who hurt others for money. The conversation stopped the moment she appeared. "I'll handle it," Dante said to the men. Not a suggestion, a dismissal. They left without acknowledging Emma's existence. The elevator doors closed, and the silence that remained felt heavier than the conversation that had preceded it. "What was that about?" Emma asked. "Nothing you need to worry about." Dante moved to the coffee maker like the last 3 days hadn't happened. like Emma hadn't been trapped in his penthouse while he coordinated whatever dark business kept men like him powerful and everyone else afraid. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. He poured coffee with hands that were steadier than they should have been. How did you sleep? Emma laughed, sharp, mean. How do you think I slept? I'm a prisoner in a tower waiting for a villain to decide whether I'm worth killing. Dante's jaw tightened. You're not a prisoner. Really? Because last time I checked, I can't leave. Can't go to work. Can't even walk to the corner store without armed guards following me like I'm merchandise that might get stolen. Emma crossed her arms. What would you call that? Protection? From what? Antonio sent a photo and a text message. That's not exactly an imminent threat. You don't know Antonio. Dante set down his cup hard enough that coffee slopped over the rim. You don't know what he's capable of when he decides someone is worth his attention. Then tell me. Emma moved closer. Stop treating me like I'm too fragile to handle the truth and tell me what I'm actually dealing with. Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of things he'd spent years trying to forget. 3 years ago, Antonio had a girlfriend, Sophia. Different Sophia than the one you met at dinner. This one was a dancer, beautiful, smart. She made the mistake of catching my attention at a charity event. Emma's stomach turned. What happened? Nothing happened. I talked to her for maybe 10 minutes. Polite conversation. The kind you have with strangers at parties you don't want to attend. Dante's hands curled into fists. Antonio decided those 10 minutes were proof I was trying to take something that belonged to him. That's insane. That's Antonio. Dante moved to the window, stared out at the city like it might contain answers he hadn't found yet. 2 weeks later, Sophia disappeared. They found her body in the river 3 days after that. Beaten so badly they had to use dental records to confirm identification. Emma's breath caught. Did he never admitted it, never got charged, but everyone knew. Everyone understood what happens when you become leverage against the Castellano family. Dante turned to face her. So when I say Antonio is dangerous, I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you that if he decides you're useful to him dead, there's nothing I can do to stop what comes next except keep you somewhere he can't reach. The words settled over Emma like ash. Heavy, suffocating. She'd known this was dangerous, had understood on some level that playing Dante's wife came with risks, but knowing something intellectually and understanding it in your bones were different animals entirely. I need air, Emma said. You can't. I need air. Her voice cracked. I need to not be in this apartment for 5 minutes. I need to feel like a human being instead of an asset you're protecting. Dante studied her. Something in his expression shifted, calculation giving way to something almost like understanding. The terrace. You can go to the terrace. He led her to a door she hadn't noticed, concealed in the far wall of the living room. It opened onto a space that stole what was left of Emma's breath. The terrace wrapped around the entire penthouse, offering 360 views of the city. Plants in massive pots. Furniture that looked designed for comfort instead of show. String lights overhead that turned the space into something almost magical. Emma walked to the railing and gripped it hard enough that her knuckles went white. The city sprawled beneath them, cars moving like blood cells through arteries, people living lives that didn't involve armed guards and death threats, and choices that got narrower by the hour. I miss my apartment, she said. I miss my shitty job and my mean boss, and knowing exactly how much money I had and what I could afford. I miss being invisible. Dante stood beside her, close enough that their arms almost touched. You were never invisible. Yes, I was. That was the whole point. Emma turned to face him. You don't understand what it's like to spend your entire life trying not to be noticed, because being noticed means becoming a target for every asshole who thinks waitresses exist to absorb their bullshit. Her voice rose. I was good at being invisible. I survived by being forgettable. And then you walked into Venenzo's and offered me money to be exactly the opposite of everything that kept me safe. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you saw someone desperate and decided she was expendable enough to use as a shield. Dante flinched, actually flinched like the words had hit something vital. That's not what this was. Then what was it? Emma demanded. What am I to you besides a temporary solution you're starting to regret? Dante stopped. Started again. You're the first person in 2 years who's looked at me like I'm capable of being something other than what everyone expects. You're the only thing in my life that feels real instead of performed. And that terrifies me because I don't know how to protect something I actually care about without destroying it. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Emma's phone buzzed. She pulled it out of her robe pocket and her blood went cold. Unknown number. Photo attachment. She opened it. Her apartment. Door hanging open. Furniture overturned. Everything she owned scattered across the floor like evidence of violence looking for a target. The message beneath read, "Come home, Emma. We need to talk." Emma's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Dante took it from her, looked at the screen, and something in him went absolutely still. "Marco," he said into his phone. "Calm, controlled, lethal. Get a team to Emma's apartment, now, and find out how the fuck Antonio got past our surveillance." He hung up and turned to Emma. "Pack a bag. Real clothes. Enough for a week." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Antonio can't follow." 20 minutes later, Emma sat in the back of an SUV with windows tinted dark enough to make the world outside look like a memory. Dante beside her. 2 security personnel in front. They drove in silence through streets Emma didn't recognize, heading toward a part of the city she'd never had reason to visit. They stopped at a building that looked abandoned from the outside. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls. The kind of place people avoided after dark. One of the guards opened Emma's door. Dante took her hand and led her through an entrance that should have been locked but swung open at his touch. Inside was different. Clean, modern, the kind of space that existed in the gap between what the world saw and what actually mattered. They took stairs down instead of up, descending into what Emma realized was a bunker disguised as a basement. "What is this place?" she asked. "Somewhere safe." Dante unlocked a door with a key card and ushered her into a room that looked like a very expensive hotel suite had been buried underground. Bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen, everything designed for extended stays. "How long have you had this?" "Long enough." Dante set her bag on the bed. "You'll stay here until I deal with Antonio." "Deal with him how?" "However I have to." His voice was flat, final. "This ends tonight." Emma's chest tightened. "What are you planning to do?" "What I should have done 2 years ago." Dante moved to the door. "Don't leave this room. Don't open the door for anyone except me or Marco. And don't—" He stopped. "Just stay safe." "Dante." He was gone before she could finish. The door locked with a click that sounded like a cell closing. Emma stood in the middle of the underground room and tried to remember when exactly her life had stopped being hers to control. She pulled out her phone. No service. Of course. Whatever this place was, it had been designed to keep the outside world from getting in. She sat on the bed and waited. Hours passed. Emma tried to sleep, but exhaustion refused to drag her under. Her mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Dante confronting Antonio. Antonio killing Dante, both of them dead, and Emma trapped underground with no way to call for help. When the door finally opened, Emma's heart nearly stopped. Dante stood in the doorway, alive, unharmed. But something in his expression made Emma's stomach drop. "What happened?" she asked. "Antonio's dead." The words came out empty, hollow. "It's done." Relief and horror hit Emma simultaneously. "How?" "Does it matter?" Dante moved into the room and closed the door behind him. "He's not coming after you. That's what matters." "Dante, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't ask me questions I can't answer without making you complicit in things you don't want to be part of." Emma swallowed the next question. Tried a different one. "What happens now?" "Now you're free." Dante pulled an envelope from his jacket and set it on the table. 20,000. Enough to cover your debts and give you a fresh start somewhere Antonio's family can't reach you. $20,000. More money than Emma had ever seen in one place. Enough to solve every problem that had driven her into Dante's world in the first place. So why did it feel like a severance package instead of salvation? "You're paying me to leave," she said. "I'm paying you to survive." Dante's voice cracked. "Antonio might be dead, but his father isn't. Marco Castellano is going to want blood for blood. And the easiest way to hurt me is through you. So you're just going to send me away. Yes. And what about, Emma gestured between them. What about this? Whatever this is. This was always temporary. Dante's expression was carved from stone. You knew that from the beginning. Did I? Because somewhere between playing your wife and actually caring whether you lived through the night, I seem to have forgotten this was just a transaction. Emma's voice rose. You said I was the only real thing in your life. I said a lot of things I shouldn't have. Dante moved toward the door. Take the money, leave the city, start over somewhere safe. That's the only ending this story gets. He was leaving, actually leaving. Emma felt panic claw up her throat. What if I don't want to go? Dante stopped, his hand on the doorknob. Then you're more foolish than I thought. Or maybe I'm the only one brave enough to admit this stopped being about money a long time ago. Dante turned. His eyes were dark, wounded. Brave doesn't keep you alive, Emma. Smart does. And the smart thing is to take your money and run as far from me as you can get. And if I'm tired of being smart, then you end up like Victoria, like Sophia, like every other person who thought they could survive in my world without becoming collateral damage. His voice dropped. I won't let that happen to you. You don't get to decide that for me. Yes, Dante said quietly. I do. Because I'm the one who dragged you into this, and I'm the one who has to live with what happens if I let you stay. He left before Emma could argue further. The door locked behind him with the same final click that meant the decision had been made whether she agreed or not. Emma stared at the envelope on the table. $20,000. Freedom. Safety. Everything she'd needed 3 weeks ago when this started. Everything except the one thing she hadn't known she wanted until it was being taken away. She opened the envelope. The cash was real, counted, enough to disappear. Her phone buzzed. Service had returned. A text from an unknown number. Dante thinks he's protecting you. He's not. Meet me tomorrow. Noon, Cathedral Square. Come alone, or he dies. Emma's hands went numb. She read the message 3 times, trying to make it say something different. It didn't. Antonio was dead. Dante had said so. Had come back from whatever dark place he'd gone to deal with the threat and confirmed it was over. Unless it wasn't. Unless Dante had lied. Emma's mind raced. If Antonio was alive, then everything Dante had just said was a lie, designed to get her to leave before the real danger arrived. If Antonio was dead, then someone else had sent the message. Someone who knew about her and Dante. Someone who wanted them both in specific places at specific times. Either way, going to Cathedral Square was suicide. Emma looked at the money, at her phone, at the locked door between her and any possibility of warning Dante that whatever he thought he'd solved was about to get infinitely worse. She made a decision she knew was wrong the moment she committed to it. She grabbed the cash and her phone and started looking for a way out that didn't involve the door. The bathroom had a small window. High, narrow, probably led to an alley or maintenance corridor. Emma dragged a chair from the kitchen, climbed up, and forced the window open. It was a tight fit, but desperation made her flexible. She squeezed through and dropped into darkness that smelled like rot and old rain. Her phone flashlight revealed a narrow passage between buildings. She followed it toward light, emerged onto a street she didn't recognize, and started walking. Cathedral Square was across town. Emma caught a bus that took her close enough, then walked the rest. Her heart hammered the entire way. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every stranger could have been someone Antonio sent, or someone Marco Castellano hired, or just someone who happened to be in the wrong place when Emma's choices finally caught up with her. The square was exactly what it sounded like. Open space dominated by a building she refused to name even in her head, surrounded by shops and cafes and tourists who had no idea they were standing in a place that might become a crime scene in the next few minutes. Emma found a bench and sat, waited, tried to look casual while her entire body vibrated with the certainty that this was the worst decision she'd ever made. Noon came and went, no Antonio, no threatening figures emerging from the crowd, just normal people living normal lives. Emma was about to leave when a woman sat down beside her, Sophia, the one from Dante's dinner party, the one who'd warned Emma about playing roles that became prisons. You came, Sophia said. Didn't look at Emma. just stared straight ahead like they were strangers sharing a bench instead of two people caught in the same web. "You sent the message," Emma said. "I did." "Why?" "Because someone needs to tell you the truth about what you've gotten yourself into." Sophia finally turned. Her eyes were hard. "And it's not going to be Dante." Emma's stomach dropped. "What truth?" "Antonio's alive." Sophia let that sink in. "Dante didn't kill him. Didn't even confront him. He just moved you underground and told you a story that would make you leave before you figured out the real plan." "What plan?" Sophia pulled out her phone and showed Emma a photo. Dante, sitting across from Marco Castellano in what looked like a restaurant. Recent. Maybe from today. They were talking, not fighting, talking like men who'd come to an agreement. "Dante made a deal," Sophia said. "Your life for Antonio's freedom. Marco gets to keep his son. Dante gets to keep his empire. And you disappear before anyone asks uncomfortable questions about whether you were ever really his wife." Emma couldn't breathe. "That's not—" "It's exactly what it looks like." Sophia's voice was cold. "You were never anything but leverage to him. A way to prove to Antonio that he had something worth protecting. And now that Antonio's father is involved, you're the price for peace." "I don't believe you." "Then don't." Sophia stood. "But when you end up dead in a river like the last woman who got too close to Dante Morelli, remember I tried to warn you." She walked away, leaving Emma alone on a bench with her entire world collapsing around her. Emma pulled out her phone with shaking hands, called Dante. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again, same result. She texted, "Is it true? Did you make a deal with Marco?" No response. Emma stood on legs that barely held her weight and started walking. Not toward the bunker, not back to Dante's penthouse. Just walking because moving felt like the only alternative to screaming. Her phone buzzed. Finally. Dante calling back. She answered. "Tell me Sophia's lying." "Where are you?" His voice was sharp, urgent. "Emma, where the fuck are you? Answer the question." "I can't do that until you tell me where you are." "Cathedral Square, where Sophia told me to meet her, where she showed me a photo of you having lunch with Marco Castellano." Emma's voice shook. "Where she told me you sold me out to save your own ass." Silence. Long enough that Emma knew the answer before Dante spoke. "It's not what it looks like," he said finally. "Then what is it?" "It's me trying to keep you alive long enough to get you out of the city before this entire situation explodes. By making deals with the people trying to kill me? By making deals with the only person who can call off his son." Dante's voice was tight. Controlled rage barely contained. "Marco doesn't want a war. Neither do I. So we came to an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where Antonio leaves you alone and I don't retaliate for what he did to your apartment." "And what do you give up in return?" Dante was quiet for too long. "You need to trust me." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I can give you right now." His voice dropped. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. You're standing in the middle of a public square having this conversation on a phone that could be monitored. Every second you stay there, you're giving Antonio or his people time to find you." "Maybe I want to be found." The words came out before Emma realized she was going to say them. "Maybe I'm tired of hiding and running and pretending I have any control over what happens next." "Emma, you know what the worst part is? I actually started to believe you cared. I thought maybe you were different from every other person who's looked at me and seen something they could use." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong." "You weren't wrong." Dante sounded broken. "You were never wrong about that." "Then prove it. Tell me the truth about your deal with Marco." "I can't. Can't or won't. Both." A pause, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. "Please, just tell me where you are so I can send someone to get you." Emma looked around the square, at the people moving through their ordinary days, at the building she refused to name dominating the skyline, at the choices narrowing to a point where wrong and worse were the only options left. "No," she said. "Figure it out yourself." She hung up, turned off her phone, and started walking toward the one place she knew Dante wouldn't think to look for her. Venenzo's. The restaurant looked exactly the same as it had 3 weeks ago. Same neon sign flickering in the window. Same smell of garlic and grease. Same exhausted servers moving between tables like they were swimming through molasses. Marco was behind the bar when Emma walked in. He looked up, did a double take, and his expression went from annoyed to furious in the space between heartbeats. "You got some fucking nerve showing up here," he said. "I need a favor," Emma said. "You need a favor." Marco laughed. Sharp, mean. "You call in sick twice in 1 week, disappear for 3 days, and now you waltz back in asking for favors? I need to use your office. Make a phone call, just for 10 minutes.
Are you out of your goddamn mind? Probably. Emma met his eyes. But I'm also desperate. And you're the only person I know who might actually help me without asking questions that get both of us killed. Marco stared at her. Something in his expression shifted. Calculation giving way to the kind of resigned concern you had for employees who'd worked for you long enough to stop being strangers. 10 minutes, he said. Then you leave and you don't come back. Ever. Capiche? Capiche. He led her to the back office. A cramped room that smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams. Emma sat behind the desk and pulled out the business card Sophia had slipped into her hand before walking away. She dialed the number. It rang twice. "Hello." A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "This is Emma Vale. Sophia told me to call this number if I wanted the truth about Dante Morelli." "Did she?" The voice was cool, professional. "And what makes you think we're interested in talking to you? Because whatever Dante's planning, I'm standing in the middle of it. And if you want leverage against him, I'm it." A pause. "Where are you?" Emma gave the address. Wondered if she'd just signed her own death warrant. Decided it didn't matter because staying silent felt more dangerous than speaking up. "Someone will be there in 20 minutes, the voice said. "Don't leave. Don't call anyone else." "And Emma?" "Yeah. If this is a setup, you'll be dead before you realize you made a mistake." The line went dead. Emma sat in Marco's office and counted the seconds until her 10 minutes expired. When she emerged, a black sedan was pulling up outside. Not an SUV, not Dante's people. Someone else. A woman stepped out. Late 30s, expensive suit, face that gave away nothing. She walked into Venenzo's like she owned the place and stopped in front of Emma. "Emma Vale?" "That's me. I'm Agent Sarah Chen, FBI." She flashed a badge too fast for Emma to verify. "We need to talk about Dante Morelli and your relationship with the Castellano crime family." Emma's world tilted. "I don't have a relationship with..." "You've been living in Dante Morelli's penthouse for 3 days. You've attended multiple events as his wife. And according to our surveillance, you just had a very interesting conversation with Sofia Castellano in Cathedral Square." Agent Chen's expression was stone. "So let's skip the part where you pretend you don't know what's happening and move directly to the part where you help us build a case against everyone involved." Emma's hands went numb. "I want a lawyer." "You're not under arrest. Yet." Chen pulled out a folder and set it on the bar. "But you are a material witness to several ongoing investigations into organized crime, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The question is whether you're a witness who cooperates or a suspect who doesn't." Emma opened the folder. Photos. Dozens of them. Her and Dante at the Castello, at the gallery, at his penthouse. Every moment documented, every conversation potentially recorded. "We've been watching Dante for 2 years, Chen said, waiting for him to make a mistake. You're that mistake, Emma. You're the civilian he dragged into his world thinking he could keep you clean. But there's no such thing as clean when you're sleeping with a man who's killed at least 7 people we know about." "I haven't slept with..." Emma stopped. "I want to talk to Dante." "That's not an option." "Then I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer." Chen studied her. "You think Dante's going to protect you? He's not. The second you become more useful to us than to him, he'll cut you loose like he did his last wife." "His last wife is dead." "Exactly." Chen closed the folder. "Which is why you're going to help us make sure you don't end up the same way. Or you're going to prison as an accessory to everything Dante's done since the moment you agreed to play his wife." Emma's throat closed. This was the real trap. Not Antonio, not Marco. The law. The thing Dante had spent his entire life evading had finally found the crack in his armor. And that crack was her. "I need time," Emma said, "to think." "You have 24 hours.
Chen handed her a card. After that, we move forward with or without your cooperation. And trust me when I say you want to be on the right side of this before that happens. She left. The sedan pulled away, and Emma stood in the middle of Vincenzo's with the realization that every choice she'd made had led to this moment where there were no good options left, just degrees of betrayal. Her phone buzzed. She'd turned it back on without thinking. A text from Dante. "Please tell me you're somewhere safe." Emma stared at the message. Thought about everything Sophia had said, everything Agent Chen had implied, every lie Dante might have told her wrapped in just enough truth to keep her compliant. She typed back, "Define safe." The response came immediately. "Anywhere I can reach you before someone else does." Why? So you can hand me over to Marco yourself? So I can keep you alive long enough to explain why everything you think you know is wrong. Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that somewhere beneath the calculated menace and the careful lies was a man who actually cared whether she lived or died for reasons that had nothing to do with protecting his empire. But wanting something didn't make it real. "Come to Vincenzo's," she typed. "Alone. You have 1 hour." She hit send and prayed she hadn't just made the last mistake of her very short life. Dante arrived in 45 minutes. He walked through this door like he owned the place, which he probably did, Emma realized. Marco disappeared into the kitchen without being asked. The few customers scattered throughout the restaurant suddenly found reasons to settle their checks and leave. Within minutes, Emma and Dante were alone. He sat across from her in the booth where they'd first met, where she'd spilled water on his expensive suit and he'd offered her $1,000 to play pretend. Where everything had started. "The FBI came to see me," Emma said. Dante's expression didn't change. "I know. You know. I've had people watching you since you left the bunker." His voice was calm, too calm. "Including when Agent Chen made her pitch. And you didn't think to warn me?" "What would I have said? Don't talk to the FBI because they're building a case against me and you're the key witness." Dante leaned back. "That's not exactly reassuring. Neither is finding out you've been under federal investigation for 2 years, and I'm apparently your biggest liability." "You're not a liability." Dante's jaw tightened. "You're the only person in my life who isn't trying to use me for something." "Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm being used by everyone. You, the FBI, Antonio, Sophia, even Marco Castellano apparently has an opinion about what I'm worth." Emma's voice rose. "I'm not a person to any of you. I'm just a chess piece everyone wants to control." "That's not true." "Prove it." Emma slid Agent Chen's card across the table. "Tell me why I shouldn't call that number and tell them everything I know about you." Dante looked at the card like it was a weapon aimed at his chest. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost defeated. "Because if you do, a lot of people are going to die. And most of them will be people who don't deserve it." "What people?" "The people who work for me. The families I protect. The businesses that depend on me staying in power to keep other, worse people from taking over." Dante met her eyes. "I'm not a good man, Emma, but I'm a necessary one. And the second the FBI brings me down, someone more violent and less careful is going to fill the vacuum. That's not my problem." "Isn't it? You think Antonio's bad now? Wait until his father has no competition. Wait until the Castellanos run this entire city without anyone strong enough to push back." Dante leaned forward. "I'm the lesser evil. That's not a defense. It's just a fact." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that choosing between evils was still choosing wrong. But she'd spent enough time in Dante's world to understand that moral clarity was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. "Agent Chen said you've killed 7 people, Emma said. "That number's low." The admission hit like a physical blow. "Jesus Christ, Dante. You asked for truth." His expression was carved from stone. 7 is the number they can prove. The actual count is higher. Every one of them was someone who threatened my family, my people. The fragile piece that keeps this city from drowning in blood." He paused. "Including Victoria." Emma's breath caught. "You really did kill your own wife." "I had her killed." The distinction still seemed important to him. "Because she was working with the Castellanos to destroy me from the inside. Because she'd become more dangerous alive than dead. Because sometimes the people you love become the weapons your enemies use against you."
And you think I'm going to end up the same way? No, Dante's voice cracked. I think you're going to end up dead because I was selfish enough to drag you into this when I should have left you alone.
Then why didn't you? Dante was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, the words came out like a confession he'd been holding back for weeks. Because when you spilled water on my table and looked at me like I was a problem you had to solve instead of a monster you had to fear, I remembered what it felt like to be human. And I wanted more of that feeling, even if it meant destroying you to get it. Emma's throat tightened. This was the truth. Ugly and selfish and painfully honest. The kind of truth that explained everything and forgave nothing. What did you trade to Marco for my safety? She asked. Territory, 3 blocks in the warehouse district, worth about $10 million in annual revenue. Dante's jaw was tight. And a promise that I wouldn't retaliate when Antonio inevitably does something stupid. That's it? That's it. You're lying. I'm not. Emma studied his face, looking for tells, for the crack in his mask that would reveal he was playing her the same way he played everyone else. She didn't find it. The FBI thinks you're going to betray me, she said. The FBI thinks everyone betrays everyone. That's how they build cases. Dante reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady. I'm not going to betray you, Emma. Even if it costs me everything, even if it means going to prison or ending up dead, you're the line I won't cross. Emma wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly her chest ached with the weight of hope, trying to resurrect itself from the ashes of every lie she'd been told. I don't know what to do, she admitted. Yes, you do. Dante's thumb traced circles on her palm, the same gesture that had become familiar, comforting. You do what you've always done. You survive. You make the choice that keeps you breathing. And if that choice is calling Agent Chen and telling her everything you know about me, then you make that call. You'd let me destroy you. I'd let you save yourself. His voice dropped. Because you were never supposed to be collateral damage for my war. And if the only way to fix that is to burn my entire world down, then that's what happens. Emma looked at the man across from her, dangerous and damaged, and offering her the kind of absolution that felt like another trap disguised as freedom. She thought about Agent Chen's folder full of photos, about Sophia's warning, about Antonio's threats, and Marco's deal, and all the ways this story could end with her dead or imprisoned or disappeared. She thought about the $20,000 still in her bag. Enough to run, enough to start over, enough to pretend the last 3 weeks had never happened. Then she thought about the way Dante had kissed her, the way he'd looked at her during dinner like she was the only real thing in a room full of performances, the way he'd just offered to let her destroy him if it meant she'd survive. She pulled out her phone. Dante's entire body went still. Emma dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Agent Chen answered. Miss Vale, I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. Emma looked at Dante, at the man who dragged her into hell and somehow made her want to stay. She made her choice. I don't have anything to tell you, Emma said. I'm not a witness. I'm not a suspect. I'm just someone who got caught up in something she didn't understand. And whatever you think I know, you're wrong. Ms. Vale, Emma hung up, turned off her phone, and slid it across the table to Dante. There, she said. Now we're both fucked. Dante stared at the phone like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. When he looked up, his eyes held something Emma had never seen before. Relief. And terror. In equal measure. Why? He asked. Because I'm tired of being smart. Emma stood. And because if I'm going to burn, I'd rather do it standing next to someone who'll burn with me than running from people who'll hunt me down anyway. Dante rose, moved around the table, pulled Emma into a kiss that tasted like desperation and gratitude and the kind of terrible decision neither of them could take back. When they broke apart, Emma's heart was racing. What happens now? She asked. Now, Dante said, we deal with the fact that you just made yourself an enemy of the FBI, the Castellano family, and probably half the criminal underworld who'll see you as a weakness they can exploit. Fantastic, Emma laughed, despite everything. Anything else? Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his expression went from concern to lethal in the space between heartbeats. What? Emma asked. He showed her the screen. A photo. Sophia. Beaten. Bloody. Tied to a chair in a room Emma didn't recognize. The message beneath read, Your turn, Dante. Bring Emma. Midnight. Or Sophia dies screaming. Emma's blood turned to ice. Who sent that?
Antonio. Dante's voice was flat. Dead. He's done playing games. This is a trap. Of course it's a trap. Dante was already moving. Which is why we're going to walk straight into it and tear his entire operation apart from the inside. Emma grabbed his arm. That's suicide. No. Dante turned to face her. His eyes were cold, focused, the kind of expression Emma imagined he wore when he did the things that made people disappear. That's war. And it ends tonight, one way or another. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Marco, it's time. Get everyone, full arsenal. We move in 2 hours. He hung up and looked at Emma with something that might have been an apology. You should run, he said. Take the money. Leave the city. Forget you ever met me. Emma thought about it. Really thought about it. Weighed survival against loyalty. Safety against the terrifying possibility that she'd found something worth dying for. She thought about Sophia bleeding in a chair because Emma had walked into Cathedral Square instead of staying hidden. She thought about all the ways running had failed to save her before. No, Emma said. I'm coming with you. Emma, you don't get to protect me anymore. Her voice was steel. You made me part of this, which means I get to decide how it ends. Dante stared at her, looking for the fear he expected to find. Emma stared back, unflinching. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but you follow my lead. You stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. They left Venenzo's together, walked into the night that had turned cold and sharp, climbed into the SUV that would take them toward violence that felt inevitable. And Emma realized with perfect, terrible clarity that she'd stopped being the waitress who spilled water weeks ago. She'd become something else entirely, something dangerous, something that might actually survive what came next, or die trying. Either way, she was done running. The warehouse district looked like the city had given up on it years ago and never bothered to check if anything had moved back in. Broken windows, rust-stained metal, streets so dark that the SUV's headlights seemed to get swallowed by shadows before they could reveal what waited ahead. Emma sat in the back seat with her heart trying to punch through her rib cage. Dante beside her. Marco, his Marco, not her former boss, in front coordinating with 3 other vehicles following behind. Men with guns, men who killed for money, men who were about to walk into a building where Antonio Castellano waited with Sophia bleeding and Emma's choices about to come due. 2 minutes, Marco said without turning around. His voice was steady, professional, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. Dante's hand found Emma's in the darkness. His palm was warm, dry, steady in a way that made her want to scream, because how could anyone be calm right now when they were driving toward certain violence and probable death? You can still change your mind, he said quietly. I can have someone take you back. Keep you safe while we handle this. Emma's throat was tight. We already had this conversation. I know, but now it's real. Now we're 30 seconds from the point where talk stops mattering and blood starts spilling. His grip tightened. Last chance, Emma. She thought about running, about taking the out he was offering and disappearing into whatever life $20,000 could buy her. She thought about Sophia tied to a chair, about the FBI building their case, about every choice that had led to this moment where bravery and stupidity looked exactly the same. I'm not leaving, she said. Dante's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, just pulled her close and kissed her hard enough that Emma tasted desperation beneath the determination. When they broke apart, his eyes held something that looked like goodbye. The SUV stopped. Emma's stomach dropped so hard she thought she might be sick. Through the windshield she could see the warehouse Antonio had chosen. 3 stories of corrugated metal and broken dreams, lit from within by harsh industrial lights that turned the windows into glowing rectangles against the night. 12 hostiles confirmed inside, Marco said, reading from his phone. Antonio's on the top floor, Sophia's with him. The rest are scattered throughout as security. Weapons? Dante asked. Assume everyone's armed. We've got superior numbers, but they've got position. Marco finally turned to look at Dante. This is a suicide run. You know that, right? I know. Dante's voice was flat. Which is why you're staying in the vehicle with Emma.
The fuck I am, Emma said. Both men turned to stare at her. You're not coming inside, Dante said. Not a question, a statement of fact he expected her to accept. Yes, I am. Emma's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. Antonio wants me there. That's the whole point. If I don't show, he kills Sophia and disappears, and we're right back where we started. If you show, he kills you both. Maybe. Or maybe he's arrogant enough to think he's won, and that makes him sloppy. Emma leaned forward. Either way, I'm the leverage here, which means I'm the only card we have that Antonio doesn't expect us to play. Dante looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the vehicle and handle this alone the way he'd handled everything else in his life, through violence and control and the willingness to sacrifice anything except the people he decided were worth protecting. But Emma could see the moment he realized she was right. Could see him doing the math and coming up with the same ugly answer. She was bait, and bait only worked if you put it where the predator could see it. You stay behind me, he said finally. You don't engage. You don't try to be a hero. You see an opening to run, you take it. Understood? Understood. I mean it, Emma. The second this goes sideways, I run. I got it. Emma grabbed his face and forced him to look at her. But you need to understand something too. I'm not doing this because I think we're going to win. I'm doing it because if we're going down, I want to be standing next to you when it happens. Something in Dante's expression cracked. He pulled her into a kiss that tasted like ash and terrible choices, and the kind of devotion that got people killed. I love you, he said against her mouth. I need you to know that. Whatever happens in there, Don't, Emma's voice broke. Don't say goodbye. Just promise you'll fight like hell to make sure we both walk out. I promise. The doors opened. Dante's men emerged from the other vehicles. 8 total, all armed, all moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. Emma climbed out on legs that barely held her weight. The night air was cold, sharp. It smelled like rust and old rain and the particular kind of decay that came from things dying slowly. Marco distributed weapons, handguns, tactical vests. One of the men tried to hand Emma a gun. She stared at it like it was a snake. I don't know how to use that, she said. Point and pull the trigger. The man's voice was flat. Safety's here. Try not to shoot us. Emma took the gun. It was heavier than she expected. Cold. She tucked it into the waistband of her jeans and tried not to think about the fact that she was about to walk into a building full of people who wanted her dead, while armed with a weapon she didn't know how to use. Dante appeared beside her. He'd changed. Not his clothes. Something deeper. The careful businessman was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. The thing he became when being human stopped being useful. Stay close, he said. Watch your corners. If someone aims at you, drop. Don't think, just drop. Emma nodded, couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around words that felt too big to fit through. They moved toward the warehouse in formation. Dante in front, Emma behind him, Marco and the others spreading out to cover flanks and rear. The entrance was a rolling door half open, light spilling out into the darkness like an invitation written in violence. Dante held up a fist. Everyone stopped. Inside, Emma could hear music, something classical, violin and piano dancing together in a way that felt obscene given where they were and what was about to happen. Antonio's fucking with us, Marco muttered. Let him. Dante's voice was ice. It'll make killing him easier. They entered. The warehouse interior was massive, open floor plan punctuated by support columns, stacks of crates creating a maze of cover and kill zones. The music came from speakers mounted somewhere above, filling the space with sound that made Emma's skin crawl. 3 men waited on the ground floor. Not hiding, just standing there with weapons drawn, watching Dante's group enter like they'd been expecting them. Dante Morelli. The one in the center smiled. Antonio said you'd come. Wasn't sure you'd be dumb enough to bring the girl. Where is he? Dante's voice carried no emotion, just flat demand. Top floor. Waiting. The man's smile widened. You want to see him? You go through us first. That can be arranged. What happened next occurred faster than Emma's brain could process. Dante moved. His gun came up smooth and certain. 3 shots. 3 bodies dropping before the sound of the first gunshot finished echoing. Emma's ears rang. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Dante grabbed her arm and pulled her forward, moving through the maze of crates while Marco and the others fanned out to secure the floor. "Stay low," Dante hissed. "They know we're here now." Gunfire erupted from above. Bullets punched through metal and concrete, sending sparks flying. Emma dropped without thinking, hitting the ground hard enough that her teeth rattled. Dante covered her body with his, returning fire toward the mezzanine where muzzle flashes revealed Antonio's men. The warehouse turned into chaos, shouting, gunfire, the smell of cordite and blood. Emma pressed her face against cold concrete and tried to breathe through the panic, threatening to shut down her entire system. Dante hauled her up. "Move! Now!" They ran, zigzagging between cover, bullets chasing them. One of Dante's men went down screaming. Another returned fire, keeping Antonio's shooters pinned long enough for Dante and Emma to reach the stairs. The stairwell was narrow, dark. Dante went first, gun raised, each step measured and controlled. Emma followed so close she could feel his body heat. Her hands shook. The gun in her waistband felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Second floor. Empty. Just storage and shadows. They kept moving. Third floor. The door at the top of the stairs was closed. Light leaked from beneath it. The music was louder here, violin hitting notes that sounded like screaming disguised as art. Dante tested the handle. Unlocked. He looked back at Emma with an expression that said everything words couldn't. This was it. The point where they either survived or didn't. The moment all their choices converged into violence that couldn't be taken back. Emma nodded. Couldn't speak. Just nodded. Dante kicked the door open. The room beyond was vast. Former office space converted into something that looked like a stage set. Chairs arranged in a semicircle, lights positioned to create dramatic shadows. And in the center, tied to a chair with blood running down her face, was Sophia. Antonio stood behind her, gun pressed against her temple. Smiling like he'd just won a game Emma didn't know they were playing. "Dante," Antonio's voice carried over the music. "Right on time. And you brought Emma. How considerate." Dante's gun was already aimed at Antonio's head. "Let her go." "Why would I do that? She's the only reason you haven't shot me yet." Antonio's smile widened. "Well, her and the 6 men I have positioned around this room, ready to turn both of you into Swiss cheese the second you do something stupid." Emma's eyes adjusted to the light. Antonio wasn't bluffing. Men emerged from shadows, behind support columns, in doorways, on the catwalk overhead. All armed. All aimed at Dante and Emma. They were surrounded. "What do you want?" Dante asked. His voice stayed level despite the fact that they were outnumbered and outgunned with exactly 0 good options. "What do I want?" Antonio laughed. "I want you to understand what it feels like to lose something you care about. I want you to watch someone you love die knowing you caused it. I want you to feel the same helpless rage I felt when you looked at me at the Castello like I was nothing." "This is about your ego?" Emma heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them. "You started a war because Dante didn't respect you enough?" Antonio's expression darkened. "Shut your mouth." "Or what? You'll shoot me? You're going to do that anyway." Emma took a step forward. Dante tried to grab her arm, but she shook him off. "You're not doing this because you're powerful. You're doing it because you're terrified everyone will realize you're just a spoiled child playing dress-up in his father's empire." "Emma." Dante's warning came too late. Antonio moved. Fast. He shoved Sophia aside and crossed the distance to Emma in 3 strides. His hand connected with her face hard enough that she tasted blood. Emma stumbled back. Dante's gun swung toward Antonio. Every weapon in the room shifted to Dante. "Don't." Antonio's voice was sharp. "You pull that trigger, and your brains decorate the wall before Emma's body hits the ground." Dante froze. His gun still raised. His eyes absolutely lethal, but he didn't fire. Antonio grabbed Emma by the hair and dragged her to the center of the room. Pain exploded across her scalp. She bit back a scream, refused to give him the satisfaction. "Here's what's going to happen," Antonio said. "You're going to put down the gun. Your men are going to stand down. And then we're going to have a conversation about how this city runs and who gets to make those decisions." "You're insane," Dante said. "I'm ambitious. There's a difference." Antonio yanked Emma's head back, exposing her throat. She felt cold metal press against her skin. "Gun. Down. Now." Dante's jaw worked.
Emma could see him calculating, running through scenarios, looking for the angle that saved her without getting them both killed. She knew the second he realized there wasn't one. He lowered the gun. "On the ground," Antonio ordered. Dante set it down, kicked it away. "Good." Antonio's grip on Emma's hair loosened fractionally. "Now we can talk like civilized people." "There's nothing civilized about this," Sophia said from her chair. Her voice was thick, slurred. "You're pathetic, Antonio. Even your father knows it." Antonio's face went red. "Shut up." "Why? Because you can't handle the truth?" Sophia laughed despite the blood running down her face. "Marco sent me here to die because he knew you'd fuck this up. He's probably already making deals with Dante's people, cutting you out, preparing to sacrifice you the same way he sacrificed every other mistake he's made." "That's not true, isn't it?" Sophia's smile was vicious. "When was the last time your father trusted you with anything that mattered? When was the last time he looked at you like you were anything more than a disappointment he hadn't figured out how to dispose of yet?" Antonio's control shattered. He released Emma and crossed to Sophia in 2 strides. His fist connected with her jaw. Once, twice, blood sprayed. Sophia's head snapped back. Emma moved without thinking. She grabbed the gun from her waistband, raised it, aimed at Antonio's back. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it steady. "Antonio," her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Step away from her." Antonio turned, saw Emma holding the gun, saw her hand shaking, saw everything she was trying to hide. He smiled. "You're not going to shoot me," he said. "Try me. You don't even know how to hold that properly." Antonio took a step toward her. "You're a waitress playing soldier. It's embarrassing." "Maybe. But I'm a waitress who's really tired of men like you thinking they can touch me without consequences." Emma's finger found the trigger. "Last chance. Step away." Antonio laughed. Actually laughed. "Or what, you'll—" Emma pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her off her feet. The sound was deafening. The bullet went wide, missed Antonio by at least 2 feet, and punched through a window behind him. But it didn't matter, because the second she fired, chaos erupted. Dante dove for his gun. Antonio's men opened fire. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. Emma hit the ground as bullets chewed through the air where she'd been standing. Sophia used the distraction to tip her chair backward. The impact broke the legs. She rolled free of the restraints and grabbed a piece of broken wood, swinging it like a club at the nearest shooter. Dante came up firing. 2 of Antonio's men went down. The others scattered for cover. Return fire forced Dante behind a support column. Emma crawled toward him on her stomach, ears ringing, heart trying to escape through her mouth. "That was the stupidest thing you've ever done," Dante shouted over the gunfire. "It worked, didn't it?" Emma made it to his side. He pulled her close, shielded her with his body as bullets hammered their position. "Marco," Dante spoke into his radio. "We need backup, top floor, now." Static. Then, "On our way, 30 seconds. 30 seconds felt like forever when people were actively trying to kill you. Antonio had taken cover on the opposite side of the room. Emma could see him through a gap in the columns, reloading with hands that shook from rage instead of fear. His men were falling. Dante's were advancing. The math was shifting. But it didn't matter if they won the battle, if Emma and Dante died in the process. "We need to move," Dante said. "That catwalk. If we can get up there, we'll have the high ground. That's 20 feet of open space." "I know." "We'll be completely exposed." "I know." Dante grabbed her face, made her look at him. "But staying here means dying here. At least moving gives us a chance." Emma looked at the catwalk, at the ladder leading up, at the 20 feet of absolutely zero cover between their position and survival. "Okay," she said. "On 3? "On 3. Dante counted. 1. Emma's pulse hammered. 2. She took a breath, held it. 3. They ran. Bullets chased them. One passed so close to Emma's head she felt the air displacement. Another sparked off metal inches from her hand. Dante returned fire without breaking stride, his gun barking in controlled bursts that kept Antonio's men pinned long enough for them to reach the ladder. Emma went up first, Dante covering below. Her hand slipped on the rungs, sweat, blood, fear making everything slick. She climbed anyway, reached the catwalk.
hauled herself over the railing. Dante followed. Halfway up, a bullet caught him. Emma saw it happen, saw him flinch, saw his hand slip, saw him start to fall. She lunged, grabbed his wrist. The weight nearly pulled her over the railing. Her shoulder screamed. Her grip slipped. "Let go," Dante said through gritted teeth. Blood ran down his side. "Emma, let go." "Fuck you." She braced her feet against the railing and pulled. Muscle and bone and pure desperate refusal to watch him die. Dante grabbed the ladder with his free hand. Together they got him over the railing onto the catwalk. Blood spread across his shirt. Dark. Too much of it. "How bad?" Emma asked. "Bad enough." Dante pressed his hand against the wound. "But I can still shoot." Below, Marco and Dante's reinforcements flooded into the room. The firefight intensified. Antonio's men were outgunned now, outnumbered, falling back toward the far exit. Antonio himself was nowhere to be seen. "He ran!" Sophia shouted from below. She'd acquired a gun from somewhere, was using it with disturbing proficiency to help clear the room. The second he realized he was losing, he fucking ran. "Where?" Dante leaned over the railing, winced as the movement pulled his wound. "Service exit, east side," Sophia pointed. "You want him? You better move. My father's people are probably already on their way to extract him." Dante looked at Emma. Blood soaking through his shirt, pain carved into every line of his face. "Stay here. Help Marco clean this up." "You're hurt." "I'll manage." "Dante, this ends tonight, Emma, one way or another, and it ends with me." He kissed her, hard, desperate. "Stay alive. That's an order." He was gone before she could argue, moving down the catwalk toward a door she hadn't noticed, leaving Emma alone above a room full of bodies and blood and the kind of violence that would give her nightmares for the rest of her life, if she lived that long. Below, the gunfire was tapering off. Dante's men had won. Antonio's people were either dead or surrendering. Marco moved through the carnage with professional efficiency, securing weapons, checking bodies, coordinating cleanup. Sophia climbed the ladder to the catwalk. Up close, she looked worse than Emma had realized. One eye swollen shut, blood matted in her hair, bruises forming across her face in purple and black. "You okay?" Emma asked. Sophia laughed. It came out wet, painful. "Define okay." "Fair point." They stood together and watched Marco work, neither speaking, just breathing, surviving, processing the fact that they'd lived through something that should have killed them. "I lied," Sophia said finally, "at Cathedral Square, about Dante making a deal to trade you to Marco." Emma's chest tightened. "Why?" "Because the FBI asked me to. Because they thought if they could turn you against Dante, you'd cooperate with their investigation." Sophia turned to look at Emma with her one good eye. "I'm sorry. For what it's worth." "It's not worth much." "I know." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "But you should also know that everything else I said was true. Dante is dangerous. Being with him will get you killed. And there's no version of this story where you walk away clean." "I'm not looking for clean anymore," Emma said. "I'm just looking for real." "Is that what you think this is?" "I think it's the closest I'm going to get." Emma looked toward the door Dante had disappeared through. "And I think I'd rather die standing next to something real than survive alone with something safe." Sophia studied her. "You really love him." "Yeah." The admission felt like surrender and victory at the same time. "I really do." "Then you better go help him." Sophia gestured toward the door. "Because Antonio's cornered and desperate men do desperate things." Emma looked at the door, at Marco coordinating below, at the gun still in her hand that she barely knew how to use. She thought about Dante bleeding somewhere in the building, about Antonio probably setting up an ambush, about every smart choice that would keep her alive and safe on this catwalk, while the man she loved walked into danger alone. She moved toward the door. "Emma," Sophia's voice stopped her. "If you're going to do this, at least do it right. Safety off. Aim center mass. And don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed." Emma checked the safety, made sure a round was chambered the way one of Dante's men had shown her, took a breath that didn't quite fill her lungs. Then she went through the door. The corridor beyond was dark, emergency lighting casting everything in red. Emma moved forward with the gun raised, trying to remember everything she'd seen in movies about clearing rooms and checking corners. It probably looked ridiculous, but it was better than walking in blind. She heard voices ahead. Angry. One of them was Dante. Emma followed the sound to another door. This one partially open. Light spilling out. She pressed herself against the wall and peered through the gap. Antonio had his back to a window, Dante facing him. 10 feet between them, both armed, both bleeding, both looking like they'd crossed so far past the point of reason that death was the only logical conclusion. "You can't win this," Dante said. His voice was strained, pain making every word cost him. "Your father's already cutting you loose. My people control the building. It's over, Antonio." "It's not over until I say it is." Antonio's gun was shaking. "You think you're better than me? You think you deserve to run this city?" "I don't think I deserve anything. I just know I'm willing to do what it takes to keep it from people like you." "People like me." Antonio's laugh was brittle. "We're exactly the same, Dante. We kill. We lie. We use people and throw them away when they're no longer useful. The only difference is you've convinced yourself you're doing it for noble reasons. The difference is I know what I am." Dante's gun stayed level, aimed at Antonio's chest. "And I don't pretend otherwise. And Emma, what is she to you? Another tool? Another weapon you'll use until she breaks? She's none of your fucking business. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Dante's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance, Antonio. Put down the gun. Walk away. Your father will hide you, protect you. You'll survive this." "I don't want to survive," Antonio's voice cracked. "I want you to hurt the way I hurt. I want you to lose the way I lose. I want—" He raised his gun. Dante fired. So did Emma. Both bullets hit Antonio's center mass. The impact threw him backward through the window. Glass shattered. Antonio's scream cut off abruptly as he fell 3 stories to the pavement below. Silence. Dante turned, saw Emma standing in the doorway with the gun still raised, still aimed at where Antonio had been, her hands shaking so badly the weapon wavered. "Emma." He crossed to her, carefully took the gun from her grip, set it aside, pulled her into his arms. "It's okay. It's over. You're okay." Emma couldn't speak, couldn't process, couldn't do anything except shake and breathe and try to reconcile the fact that she'd just killed someone, actually killed them, pulled a trigger and ended a life. "I shot him," she said. Her voice sounded distant, disconnected. "I killed him. We both did." Dante's arms tightened around her. "And he would have killed us if we hadn't. That doesn't make it better." "No, it doesn't." Dante pulled back, looked at her with eyes that understood exactly what she was feeling. "But it makes it necessary, and sometimes that's all we get." Footsteps in the corridor. Marco appeared with 3 men. They took in the scene. Broken window, missing Antonio, blood everywhere. "He's dead," Marco confirmed after checking below. "Multiple gunshot wounds, probably dead before he hit the ground." "His father?" Dante asked. "Already making calls. He wants to meet, tonight, negotiate terms." Marco looked at Dante's wound. "You need a hospital." "I need to end this first." Dante straightened despite the pain it clearly caused. "Set up the meeting. Neutral ground. 2 hours." "You can barely stand." "I'll manage." Dante's voice left no room for argument. "This ends tonight. All of it." Marco nodded and disappeared to make arrangements. Emma looked at Dante, at the blood soaking his shirt, at the exhaustion and pain carved into every line of his face, at the man who'd just killed to protect her and was about to walk into another dangerous situation with a hole in his side. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Emma, we already had this argument. I'm coming." She grabbed his hand. "You said it yourself. This ends tonight, which means we end it together or not at all." Dante looked like he wanted to fight her, wanted to lock her somewhere safe and handle this the way he handled everything else, alone. But maybe he was too tired or too hurt or too aware that fighting Emma on this would waste energy he couldn't afford to spend. "Okay," he said finally. "Together." They left the warehouse hand in hand, walked past bodies and blood and the wreckage of a battle that would reshape the city's criminal landscape, climbed into an SUV that would take them to one final confrontation. Emma's hand still shook, Her ears still rang. Her mind kept replaying the moment Antonio fell, the sound of breaking glass, the way his scream had cut off. She'd killed someone. That fact wouldn't leave, wouldn't soften, would probably follow her for the rest of her life, however long or short that turned out to be. But she'd also saved Dante, saved herself, ended a threat that would have destroyed them both. Sometimes survival required becoming something you'd never wanted to be. Emma was learning that lesson faster than she'd ever imagined possible. The SUV drove through streets that looked normal. People living normal lives, unaware that miles away a war had just been fought, that bodies were being moved, that deals were being made that would determine how this city bled for the next decade. They pulled up to a restaurant Emma didn't recognize. Upscale. The kind of place where powerful people met to divide territories and discuss murder over wine that cost more than rent. Marco Castellano's car was already there. Dante took a breath, straightened his jacket to hide the blood, checked his weapon, looked at Emma with an expression that held too many things to name. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "I need you to know that bringing you into my life was the best mistake I ever made." Emma's throat tightened. "That's not a comfort. It's the truth." He kissed her, soft, almost gentle. "Stay close, stay quiet. Let me handle the talking." They got out of the SUV and walked toward the restaurant entrance, toward Marco Castellano and whatever terms he'd demand for his son's death, toward an ending Emma couldn't predict, toward the future they'd fought for, or the grave they'd earned. Either way, they'd face it standing side by side, because that was the only choice left that felt like choosing at all. The restaurant was the kind of place where secrets went to die over $50 steaks and wine older than Emma's parents would have been. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, classical music playing low enough to give the illusion of privacy while still filling the silence between threats disguised as negotiation. Marco Castellano sat at a corner table with his back to the wall, flanked by two men who looked like they'd been carved from the same stone as the building's foundation. Hard, immovable, designed to withstand pressure. He was older than Emma expected. Late 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that had learned to show nothing useful decades ago. He didn't stand when Dante approached, didn't offer his hand, just gestured to the empty chairs across from him like a king granting audience to subjects who'd forgotten their place. "Dante." His voice was quiet, controlled, nothing like Antonio's volatile rage. "I appreciate you coming. Did I have a choice?" Dante lowered himself into the chair carefully. The wound in his side was still bleeding despite the makeshift bandage Marco had applied in the SUV. Emma sat beside him, close enough to feel the tremor running through his body that he was working hard to hide. "There's always a choice." Marco's gaze shifted to Emma, assessed her the way you'd assess a weapon someone had just placed on the table, though sometimes the alternatives are worse than compliance. "Is that a threat?" Emma asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "An observation." Marco leaned back. "My son is dead, killed in your presence, under circumstances that suggest both of you pulled triggers." He paused. "Let that fact settle. I could spend the next decade destroying everything Dante has built, burning his empire to ash, making sure everyone who works for him dies screaming. But you won't," Dante said. Not a question. A statement of fact based on calculations Emma couldn't follow. "No, I won't." Marco signaled a waiter, ordered wine like they were discussing business instead of body counts. Because Antonio was a liability, volatile, uncontrollable, more interested in proving himself than in building anything that lasted. The wine arrived. Marco poured 3 glasses with steady hands. He was going to get himself killed eventually. You just expedited the timeline. Emma stared at the man across from her. "You're not angry that we killed your son." "I'm furious." Marco's voice never rose, never changed temperature, just stayed flat and lethal. "But fury without purpose is weakness, and I didn't build what I have by indulging weakness." He slid a folder across the table. Dante opened it. Emma looked over his shoulder. Photos, documents, bank transfers, a comprehensive record of Antonio's activities over the past 6 months, deals made without permission, territories encroached on, alliances formed with people who should have been enemies. He was planning a coup, Marco said, against me, using your conflict as cover to consolidate power. If he'd succeeded in killing you tonight, I would have been next. He sipped his wine. So in a way, you did me a favor. This doesn't feel like gratitude, Dante said. It's not. It's business. Marco closed the folder. Antonio's death creates a vacuum, one I need filled by someone who understands that loyalty matters more than ambition. And you think that's me?
I think that's us. Marco's eyes were sharp, calculating.
You control the south side. I control the north. We've been bleeding each other for years over territories neither of us can hold without constant war. I'm proposing something different.
What?
Emma asked. Peace. Real peace. Enforced by mutual interest instead of mutual destruction. Marco looked at Dante. You keep what's yours. I keep what's mine. We establish clear boundaries, profit sharing on overlapping interests, coordinated response to outside threats, and most importantly, no more personal vendettas disguised as business decisions. Dante was quiet for a long moment. Emma could see him running calculations, weighing options, looking for the trap she knew had to be hidden somewhere in the offer. What do you want from me? Dante asked finally. Legitimacy. Marco's answer was immediate. You've been moving money into legitimate businesses for years, building fronts that actually turn profit. I want in. I want my resources laundered through your operations. And in return, you get protection, expansion opportunities, access to markets I control. You want me to make you clean. I want us to make each other indispensable. Marco leaned forward. We're both getting old, Dante. Tired. This life has an expiration date, and we're both past it. Antonio's death is proof. The next generation is coming whether we like it or not. The question is whether we build something that survives us or whether we burn everything down fighting over scraps. Emma felt Dante tense beside her. This wasn't just a business proposal. This was Marco Castellano offering to end a war that had been running since before Emma was born. It was too easy, too clean, too much like the kind of deal that came with fine print written in blood. And if I say no, Dante asked, then we go back to killing each other, slowly, expensively, destructively. Marco's voice stayed level. Your wound will get infected. You'll spend 2 weeks recovering. During that time, my people will hit 3 of your distribution centers. You'll retaliate. I'll respond. And in 6 months, we'll both be weaker while the Russians or the Colombians move into territories we're too busy fighting over to protect. It was the truth. Emma could see it in Dante's expression, could see him doing the math and coming up with the same ugly answer. Continuing the war destroyed them both. Ending it required trusting a man whose son they'd just killed. I need guarantees, Dante said. You need faith. Marco smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. But I'll give you contracts instead. Legal documents binding both our organizations to terms enforced by people who don't care about our history, lawyers, accountants, the kind of boring violence that keeps civilized men honest. And Emma? Dante's hand found hers under the table. What happens to her? Nothing. Marco's gaze shifted to Emma. She was caught in Antonio's vendetta, a civilian used as a weapon. As far as I'm concerned, the moment my son died, her involvement ended. She walks away clean. I don't believe you, Emma said. I don't care if you believe me. Marco's tone held something almost like respect. I care that you understand the difference between a threat and a promise. I'm promising you safety. But that safety requires you to disappear, leave the city, start over somewhere my reach doesn't extend, and most importantly, forget everything you've seen. Or, Emma's voice was ice, or you become a problem that needs solving, and I solve problems permanently. Marco turned back to Dante. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires and we go back to war. He stood. His men followed. They left the restaurant without another word, left Dante and Emma sitting at a table with wine they hadn't touched, and a choice that felt like choosing between drowning and burning. Emma waited until Marco's car pulled away before speaking. Do you trust him? No. Dante's answer was immediate. But I trust that he's tired of bleeding, and tired men make practical decisions instead of emotional ones. So you're going to accept? I don't know. Dante's hand tightened on hers. Taking his deal means legitimacy, means building something that outlasts us, means you get to walk away and actually survive instead of spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. He paused. But it also means trusting that Marco won't decide 6 months from now that I'm more valuable dead than alive. And if you don't take it, we go to war, real war, the kind that ends with bodies in the street and territories carved up by whoever's strong enough to take them. Dante turned to face her. Either way, you're leaving, tonight. I've already made arrangements, new identity, money in an offshore account, a life far enough away that none of this can touch you. Emma's chest tightened. You're making this decision for me. Yes. I don't get a say. No. Dante's voice was gentle, final. Because if I give you a choice, you'll make the wrong one. You'll stay. And staying will get you killed. You don't know that. I do. Because I've seen this play out a dozen times with a dozen different people who thought they could survive in my world without becoming casualties. His eyes held hers. I won't let that happen to you, Emma, even if it means you hate me for forcing you out. Emma pulled her hand free. You're a hypocrite. Probably. You spent weeks telling me this was my choice, that I could decide what I was willing to risk, and now that the risk is real, you're taking that choice away. Yes, Dante didn't flinch, because the difference between theory and practice is measured in graves, and I've filled enough of them. So that's it. Emma's voice shook. We survived tonight. You make your deal with Marco, I disappear, and we just pretend the last month never happened. No. Dante reached for her face, cupped it gently. We remember it happened. We remember what it felt like to find something real in the middle of all this ugliness, and we let that be enough. It's not enough. Tears Emma had been holding back for hours finally broke through. It's not anywhere close to enough. I know. Dante's thumb brushed away the tears. But it's all we get. The SUV was waiting outside. Marco, Dante's Marco, opened the door. Emma climbed in feeling numb, disconnected, like she was watching herself from a distance instead of actually living through the moment. They drove to Dante's penthouse in silence, up the elevator, through the door into the space that had become more familiar than Emma's own apartment over the past few weeks. Dante moved to the bar, poured whiskey with hands that shook from blood loss and exhaustion. You need a hospital, Emma said. I need to not have federal agents asking questions about bullet wounds. Dante downed the drink, poured another. Marco will send someone, a doctor who knows how to keep his mouth shut. I'll be fine. Will you? Emma crossed to him. Because from where I'm standing, you look like you're about 30 minutes from passing out. Then I have 30 minutes to make sure you understand why you have to leave. I already understand. I just don't agree. Dante set down his glass, turned to face her fully. What do you want me to say, Emma? That I love you. I do. That I want you to stay? I do. That watching you walk away is going to destroy me in ways Antonio never could? It will. His voice cracked. But none of that changes the fact that keeping you here is selfish, dangerous, the kind of decision that gets you killed and makes me the monster everyone already thinks I am. What if I'm willing to take that risk? You don't get to make that choice. Why not? Emma's voice rose. Why do you get to decide what I'm capable of surviving? Why do you get to be the only one who determines what risks are worth taking? Because I'm the one who dragged you into this. Dante's control finally shattered. Because every bad thing that's happened to you since the night you spilled water on my table is my fault. Because I looked at you and saw something I wanted and took it without thinking about what it would cost you. He grabbed her shoulders. Not rough, just desperate. I'm trying to give you back the life I stole. Don't make me fail at the one decent thing I have left. Emma looked at the man in front of her, bleeding, exhausted, offering her freedom like it was salvation instead of exile. And she realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This wasn't about protecting her. This was about punishing himself. You think you don't deserve to be happy, she said quietly. Dante's hands dropped. I know I don't. Because of Victoria. Because of the people you've killed. Because you've spent so long being the monster everyone expects that you've forgotten, you're allowed to be anything else. I'm not allowed. His voice was hollow. That's the point. Men like me don't get redemption arcs. We don't get happy endings. We get graves or prison cells, and if we're lucky, We die before everyone we care about does.
Is that what you want? Emma stepped closer. To die alone knowing you pushed away the one person who looked at you and saw something worth saving? I don't want it, but it's what I deserve. Fuck what you deserve. Emma grabbed his face, made him look at her. I'm not some prize you won or punishment you earned. I'm a person making a choice. And I choose to stay. I choose you. Even knowing what it costs, even understanding the risks, I choose this. Emma, no. You don't get to argue. You don't get to protect me from myself. You wanted honesty? Here's honesty. I'm terrified. I have no idea if I can survive in your world. I'm probably going to get myself killed doing something stupid. But I'd rather die trying to build something real with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I'd been brave enough to stay. Dante stared at her, looking for the fear he expected to find, the hesitation that would prove he was right. Emma stared back, unflinching. You're insane, he said finally. Probably. But so are you for thinking I'd actually leave. Something in Dante's expression cracked. The careful control, the practiced distance, the walls he'd spent years building to keep people out. They all came down at once, and what Emma saw underneath made her chest ache. Hope. Fragile and terrified, but real. Dante pulled her into a kiss that tasted like blood and whiskey, and the kind of desperate relief that came from realizing you weren't going to die alone after all. Emma kissed him back with everything she had. Every fear, every hope. Every terrible choice that had led to this moment where wrong and right didn't matter nearly as much as real. They broke apart, breathing hard. If you stay, Dante said against her mouth, there's no going back. No changing your mind when things get hard. No running when the FBI comes knocking or Marco decides peace isn't profitable anymore. I know. You'll be a target forever. Every enemy I have will see you as leverage. Every ally will wonder if your weakness they can exploit. I know. And I can't promise to keep you safe. I can't promise this won't end badly. I can't promise anything except that I'll try like hell to build something with you that's worth the risk you're taking. Then try. Emma kissed him again, softer. That's all I'm asking. Just try. The doctor arrived an hour later, an older man who'd clearly done this before. He examined Dante's wound with professional detachment, stitched it closed with practiced efficiency, and left antibiotics and painkillers with instructions Emma barely heard through the exhaustion threatening to drag her under. By the time he left, dawn was breaking over the city, soft light turning everything gold and deceptively beautiful. Emma stood at the windows and watched the sunrise paint the skyline. Dante came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. I talked to Marco, he said quietly. I'm taking the deal. Emma's heart skipped. You're sure? No, but I'm tired of bleeding, tired of fighting wars I can't win, tired of building an empire that's going to crumble the second I'm gone. He tightened his hold. If I'm going to build something that lasts, I'd rather do it with you beside me than alone surrounded by people who only stay because I pay them to. What does that mean, practically? It means over the next year we transition, move money into legitimate businesses, divest from anything that can't survive federal scrutiny, build partnerships with people who shake hands instead of pull triggers. Dante paused. It means becoming boring, respectable, the kind of people who worry about quarterly earnings instead of territory disputes. Can you do that? Emma asked. After everything? I don't know, but I want to try. He turned her to face him. With you. If you're still willing. Emma looked at the man in front of her, scarred, damaged, offering her a future that would be hard and complicated and nothing like the life she'd imagined when she was serving tables at Venenzo's and dreaming of something better. But it was real, and real was all she'd ever wanted. I'm willing, she said. 3 months later, Emma stood in a room that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. The building had been a warehouse once. Now it was being converted into something else. A community center, Dante had called it. A place where kids from neighborhoods like the one Emma grew up in could learn skills that didn't involve guns or desperation. It was his idea. His money. His attempt at building something that helped instead of hurt. Emma had thought he was joking when he first mentioned it. Rich men didn't suddenly develop consciences. Criminals didn't wake up one day and decide to give back. But Dante had been serious.
deadly serious in the way he approached everything that mattered. The center would open in 6 months, would offer job training, education programs, resources for families struggling the way Emma's had struggled. It wouldn't fix everything, wouldn't erase the damage Dante had done or the people he'd hurt, but it was something, a start, a different kind of legacy than the one he'd been building. What do you think? Dante appeared beside her. He moved easier now. The wound had healed. The limp was almost gone, but sometimes Emma caught him touching the scar like it was a reminder of things he didn't want to forget. I think it's going to help people, Emma said. I think it's going to make a difference. Is that enough? I don't know, but it's more than nothing. She turned to face him. How did the meeting with the FBI go? Dante's expression tightened. Agent Chen is persistent. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. He took her hand. They want me to flip, testify against Marco and half the criminal organizations in the city. In exchange, they'll offer immunity for everything except the murders they can prove. Emma's stomach dropped. What did you say? I told them I'd think about it. Dante's thumb traced circles on her palm. The gesture had become habit, comfort. But we both know what thinking about it means. You're going to say no. I'm going to say no. He met her eyes. Because the second I flip, Marco knows. The second Marco knows, the peace we negotiated falls apart. The second that falls apart, we're right back where we started, except now I'm a snitch with a target on my back, and you're standing next to me. So we just, what? Pretend the FBI isn't building a case? We prepare. We make sure every business is legitimate, every transaction documented, every employee clean. We build something so boring and respectable that even if they investigate, they find nothing worth prosecuting. Dante paused. It's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. Emma wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that running from the FBI was stupid and short-sighted, and eventually they'd find something they could use. But she'd spent enough time in Dante's world to understand that perfect solutions didn't exist, just degrees of manageable risk. Okay, she said. We do it your way. Our way, Dante corrected. You're part of this now, which means you get a say. Do I? Emma raised an eyebrow. Because I seem to remember you making a lot of decisions for me not that long ago. I was wrong. The admission came easier than Emma expected. About a lot of things, but mostly about thinking I could protect you by pushing you away. He pulled her close. You're safer with me than without me. Not because I can stop bad things from happening, but because at least if you're here I can see the threats coming. It was a dark kind of logic. The kind that only made sense if you'd lived long enough in the shadows to understand that sometimes the safest place was standing next to the most dangerous person in the room. But Emma had learned to speak that language, had learned to navigate a world where safety was relative and survival required constant calculation. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen. And surprisingly, she didn't regret it. 6 months after that, Emma stood in front of a mirror wearing white. Not the Valentino dress from the first night, not the red gown from the gallery. Something new, something chosen. A dress that cost less than both of them combined but felt more important because it wasn't part of a performance. This was real. Behind her, Sophia helped with the veil. The scars on Sophia's face had faded but not disappeared. Reminders of the night everything changed. She'd left her husband, left Marco's organization, started working with Dante on the legitimate side of things, managing the community center, building programs, trying to create something better than the world that had nearly destroyed them both. You ready? Sophia asked. Emma looked at her reflection, at the woman staring back. She barely recognized her anymore. Not the exhausted waitress, not the terrified actress playing a role she didn't understand. Someone else. Someone forged in violence and desperation and the stubborn refusal to let circumstances define her. I think so, Emma said. You think or you know? I know. Emma turned to face Sophia. I'm terrified, but I'm ready. Good, because Dante's been pacing outside for the last 20 minutes like he's worried you're going to bolt. Emma laughed despite herself. He knows I'm not going anywhere. Does he? Because commitment still scares him. Real commitment. The kind that doesn't come with exit strategies and contingency plans.
Sophia's expression softened. You're the first person he's let himself need. That's terrifying for someone who spent his entire life making sure he didn't need anyone. What about you? Emma asked. Do you think I'm making a mistake? Sophia was quiet for a moment. I think you're making a choice. And choices are only mistakes if you spend the rest of your life regretting them instead of living with them. She handed Emma the bouquet. Simple flowers. Nothing elaborate. Don't regret this. Whatever comes next, don't regret choosing to be happy. The venue was small, intimate. Just a handful of people who'd survived the war and come out the other side changed. Marco was there, sitting in the back. He'd sent a gift, a truce made tangible. Emma hadn't opened it, didn't need to. The fact that he'd come was message enough. The music started. Emma walked down the aisle on legs that felt steadier than they should have. Past faces she'd learned to recognize. Past lives intersecting with hers in ways she still didn't fully understand. Toward Dante standing at the front looking like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. He'd cleaned up. Suit perfectly tailored, hair cut. The scar on his side hidden beneath expensive fabric. But Emma could still see it. Could still see all the scars he carried. The ones on his skin and the ones carved deeper. She could also see something else. Something new. A lightness that hadn't been there before. Like somewhere in the process of building something legitimate, he'd remembered how to breathe. Emma reached him, took his hands, felt them shake slightly, despite his best efforts to stay controlled. You showed up, he said quietly, trying for humor, landing on vulnerability. Of course I showed up, Emma smiled. Where else would I be? Running, hiding, making smart choices instead of marrying a criminal trying to go straight. You're not a criminal anymore. You're a philanthropist with a complicated past. Emma squeezed his hands. There's a difference. Is there? We're going to pretend there is. She looked at the officiant, at the woman who'd agreed to marry them despite knowing exactly who Dante was. I'm ready when you are. The ceremony was short. Simple vows about loving and honoring and staying together through whatever came next. Emma meant every word. Could see in Dante's eyes that he did too. When they kissed, it felt like sealing a promise they'd been making for months without realizing it. The reception was equally small. Dinner at an Italian restaurant Dante had quietly bought and cleaned up. Legal now. Legitimate. The food was incredible. The wine was expensive. The conversations were careful, everyone aware that they were celebrating something improbable in a room full of people who'd nearly killed each other not that long ago. But they'd survived. And survival deserved celebration. Near midnight, Emma found herself on the restaurant's balcony with Dante. The city spread below them, bright and chaotic and utterly indifferent to the fact that two people who shouldn't have worked had somehow found a way forward. I never thought I'd do this, Dante said. Get married, actually married, to someone I chose instead of someone who was strategically useful. Having regrets already? Emma teased. No, just grateful. He pulled her close. You could have run, should have run. Every rational bone in your body told you to take the money and disappear. But you stayed. I stayed because running felt like dying slowly instead of living dangerously. Emma rested her head against his chest. And I was tired of dying. Are you happy? The question came out almost shy. Really happy? Emma thought about it. Really thought. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in debt and exhaustion. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined standing here, married, wealthy, safe in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with choosing someone who'd fight like hell to build something worth keeping. Yes, she said. I'm happy. Even knowing what it cost to get here, especially knowing that. Emma looked up at him. Because the cost makes it real. Makes it something we earned instead of something that just happened to us. Dante kissed her, soft and certain, and full of the kind of promise that came from actually meaning it. When they finally went home to the penthouse that was officially theirs now instead of just his, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that came from needing things to change. The earned kind that came from having survived long enough to see them actually get better. 1 year later, Emma stood in the same community center she'd helped build. It was full now, kids learning, parents connecting, People finding resources they'd never known existed. The programs worked. Not perfectly, but well enough to matter. Dante was there too, teaching a class on financial literacy because apparently criminals were excellent at managing money when they weren't using it to fund violence. The irony wasn't lost on Emma, but the kids didn't care about his past. They just knew he was someone who'd made it out and was willing to show them how. Emma watched him through the window, watched the way he engaged with students. Patient, clear, actually giving a damn about whether they understood. A year ago, she would have said this was impossible, that men like Dante didn't change, didn't soften, didn't become the kind of people who built instead of destroyed. She would have been wrong. Her phone buzzed. Agent Chen. They still talked occasionally, professional courtesy disguised as surveillance. Emma answered. Ms. Vale. Chen's voice held the same professional distance it always did. Or should I say, Mrs. Morelli now? Emma's fine. Emma moved away from the window. What can I do for you? I wanted to inform you that we're closing our investigation into Dante Morelli's criminal activities. Emma's heart stopped. What? After 18 months of investigation, we've determined that while Mr. Morelli has significant historical ties to organized crime, his current business operations are entirely legitimate. Every transaction documented, every employee clean, every tax payment current. Chen paused. It appears he's actually reformed. You sound disappointed. I'm realistic. Reformed criminals are statistical anomalies, but occasionally the data surprises us. Chen's tone shifted. I also wanted to warn you that Marco Castellano is under federal indictment. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. He'll likely die in prison. Emma's chest tightened. Does Dante know? I imagine he will shortly. The indictment is being unsealed as we speak. Another pause. For what it's worth, Ms. Vale, your husband's cooperation would have significantly expedited this process. The fact that he refused and we still built a case suggests he made the right choice. Loyalty matters in your world. He's not part of that world anymore, Emma said. Isn't he? Because from where I'm standing, he's just better at hiding it. Chen's voice held something almost like respect. But I suppose time will tell. Give him my regards. The line went dead. Emma stood on the sidewalk and processed. Marco was going to prison, the man who'd negotiated peace, who'd allowed them to build something legitimate, who'd shown up to their wedding and sent a gift that said more about resignation than reconciliation. He was done, which meant the power vacuum would open. Other families would move in. The peace Dante and Marco had built would fracture, and every enemy Dante had ever made would wonder if this was their chance. Emma walked back inside, found Dante still teaching, pulled him aside when the class took a break. Chen called, she said. Marco's been indicted. Dante's expression went carefully neutral. When? Today, federal charges, he's done. Good. The word came out flat, final. He deserved worse. What happens now? Emma asked. To the territories he controlled, to the peace you negotiated. I don't know. Dante ran a hand through his hair. But whatever happens, we're not getting pulled back in. We're out. We stay out. Even if that means other people suffer? Even then, Dante's jaw tightened. I spent 20 years bleeding for this city, building an empire, fighting wars. And the second I stopped, the world didn't end. Someone else filled the vacuum. Someone else took over. That's how this works. The game continues whether you're playing or not. And you're okay with that? I have to be. He pulled her close. Because the alternative is going back. And going back means losing you. Losing this. Losing everything we've built that's actually worth keeping. He rested his forehead against hers. I'm done being the monster, Emma, even if the city needs one. Emma understood the weight of that choice, the guilt that came from having power and choosing not to use it. The knowledge that walking away meant other people would suffer in ways you could have prevented, but she also understood that sometimes survival required letting go, required accepting that you couldn't save everyone, that trying would destroy you and everyone you loved. Okay, she said. We stay out. Together? Together. 2 years after their wedding, Emma opened a business. Not a restaurant, not something tied to Dante's world.
a foundation, nonprofit, dedicated to helping people like her, people drowning in debt, working jobs that destroyed them, trapped in cycles they couldn't break alone. It was funded by Dante's money, legitimately earned now, taxed, documented, clean, but the work was hers. Her vision, her attempt at building something that helped instead of hurt. The foundation provided grants, loan forgiveness programs, job training, housing assistance, all the things Emma had needed when she was serving tables at Venenzo's and wondering if tomorrow would finally be the day her life stopped being a disaster. She couldn't save everyone, but she could save some. And some was better than none. Dante supported it. Not just with money, with time, connections, resources. He sat on the board, helped with strategy, used skills he'd developed running a criminal empire to run something that actually made the world slightly less terrible. It was strange, beautiful, the kind of redemption arc Emma hadn't believed was possible, but it was also hard, exhausting. Some days the weight of other people's desperation felt like it would crush her. Some days she wondered if any of it mattered, if helping 100 people made a difference when thousands more suffered. Those were the days Dante found her, pulled her close, reminded her that perfect wasn't the enemy of good, that incremental progress was still progress, that doing something mattered more than doing nothing even when nothing felt easier. And gradually Emma started to believe him. 3 years after their wedding, Emma stood in their bedroom and stared at a test that had just changed everything. 2 lines, clear, unmistakable. She was pregnant. Emma sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process. She hadn't planned this, hadn't thought seriously about children. Her life was complicated enough without adding a completely dependent human to the mix. But the longer she stared at those 2 lines, the more something shifted inside her, fear giving way to something unexpected. Hope. Again. Different this time. The kind that came from realizing you were about to create something entirely new, something that didn't exist yet but would soon, something that would carry forward the best parts of what you'd built, and hopefully none of the worst. Dante found her there, took one look at her face and the test in her hands, and his entire expression transformed. Is that? He couldn't finish the question. Yes. Emma's voice shook. I'm pregnant. Dante sat beside her, didn't speak, just breathed, processing. Finally he asked, how do you feel about it? Terrified, excited, completely unprepared. Emma looked at him. How do you feel? The same. Dante took her hand. But also hopeful. That maybe we can do this right. Give this kid something better than what we had. What if we can't? Emma's fear finally broke through. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if you're a terrible father? What if we damage this kid the way we were damaged? Then we do our best to fix it. Dante's voice was steady, certain. We're not perfect, Emma. We're never going to be perfect. But we're here, we're trying. And trying counts for something. Emma leaned into him. Let him hold her while she processed the reality of what came next. They were going to be parents. We're going to raise a child. We're going to try to build a life for someone else that was better than the ones they'd barely survived themselves. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was real. 7 months later, Emma went into labor at 3 a.m. Dante drove them to the hospital with hands that shook on the steering wheel despite years of staying calm under pressure. Apparently, gunfights were easier to handle than childbirth. Emma would have found it funny if she wasn't currently experiencing pain that made getting shot seem preferable. The delivery was long, brutal, the kind of experience that made Emma understand why people called it labor. But eventually, finally, a cry filled the room. A girl, small, perfect, completely unaware that she'd just been born into a family with a complicated past and an uncertain future. The nurse placed her in Emma's arms. Dante stood beside the bed looking at his daughter like she was the most terrifying and miraculous thing he'd ever seen. What do we name her? He asked. Emma had thought about this, had a list of possibilities, but looking at the tiny human in her arms, only one felt right. Hope, she said. We name her Hope. Dante's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. Hope Morelli. Hope Morelli. Emma kissed her daughter's forehead. Welcome to the world, baby girl. It's complicated and messy and sometimes terrible, But your dad and I are going to do everything we can to make sure the good parts outweigh the bad." Hope yawned, utterly unconcerned with the weight of promises being made on her behalf. And Emma realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This was why she'd stayed. This was why she'd chosen Dante despite every rational reason to run. Not because she'd needed saving, not because he'd offered her money or safety or escape from her old life. Because somewhere in the violence and chaos and terrible choices, they'd found something neither of them had known they were looking for. A future. Real and imperfect and worth fighting for. Together, they'd survived their past. Built something new. Created a life that didn't erase the damage they'd done, but didn't let it define them either. It wasn't a fairy tale, wasn't clean or simple or anything close to easy, but it was theirs. And theirs was enough. 5 years later, Emma stood in the kitchen of a house they'd bought outside the city. Not the penthouse. Somewhere quieter, safer, better for raising a child. Hope was 5 now, smart, fearless, utterly unaware that her parents had once been very different people in a very different world. Emma and Dante had agreed she'd learn eventually. When she was old enough. When the truth wouldn't destroy the innocence they were working so hard to protect. But for now, she was just a kid. Playing in the backyard. Laughing. Living the kind of childhood Emma had never had. And Dante had lost too young. Dante came up behind Emma and wrapped his arms around her waist. They stood together and watched their daughter through the window. "Do you ever miss it?" Emma asked. "The old life, the power, the control." "No." His answer was immediate. "I miss the simplicity sometimes, miss knowing exactly who I was and what I was supposed to do, but I don't miss the person I had to become to survive it." "Who are you now?" Emma turned to face him. "Really?" Dante thought about it. "I'm a father, a husband, someone trying to build something good with the time I have left. Someone who made terrible choices and is living with the consequences while trying not to make the same mistakes again." He paused. "I'm someone who loves you more than I thought I was capable of loving anything." Emma kissed him, soft and certain and full of the kind of devotion that came from actually choosing each other every day for years instead of just once in a moment of desperation. "I love you too," she said, "even though you're still kind of a mess." "Kind of?" Dante raised an eyebrow. "I thought I was doing better than kind of." "You are. But perfectionism is overrated." Emma smiled. "Besides, I'm kind of a mess too. We balance each other out." They stood together and watched hope chase butterflies. Watched the sun paint everything gold. Watched their daughter live a life they'd fought to make possible. And Emma realized with perfect clarity that this was the ending she'd needed. Not the one she'd expected when she spilled water on Dante's table and he'd offered her $1,000 to play pretend. Not the fairy tale where the waitress married the prince and lived happily ever after in a castle made of money and easy choices. This was better. This was real. It was messy and complicated and sometimes still scary. It was built on a foundation of violence they could never fully escape. It was imperfect in ways that would probably haunt them both until they died. But it was also full of love. Genuine love. The kind that came from seeing someone at their absolute worst and choosing them anyway. The kind that survived because it had been tested and hadn't broken. Emma had started this journey drowning, desperate, willing to do anything for money that would buy her one more month of survival. She'd ended it breathing, building, creating a life worth living instead of just enduring. And somewhere in between, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. The greatest thing Dante had ever bought wasn't her time or her performance or even her safety. It was the chance for both of them to become people who deserved the love they'd found. And that, Emma thought, as she watched her daughter laugh in the sunlight, was worth every terrible choice and dangerous moment it had taken to get here. They'd survived. They'd changed. They'd built something real. And real, it turned out, was everything she'd ever wanted.